Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the City of North Plains. This is our regular session City Council minutes meeting Tuesday, September 5th, 2023 at 7:06. Thank you very much for your patience while we get settled. At this time, I'd like to have everyone stand for the pledge of allegiance.
One nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, Lori, roll call, please.
Thank you. Counselor Fate,
Here.
Counselor Kendall,
Here.
Counselor Martinez here, Counselor Papen here, Counselor
Present.
Smith
Here.
and Mayor Cunningham.
Here, thank you. Item number 5 on our agenda is the consent agenda. Tonight, we're approving the September 5th, 2023 City Council's regular session agenda, and we're also approving the August 21st, 2023 City Council minutes. At this time, are there any corrections or additions to the minutes that we need to be aware of? Hearing none, I'll call for a motion. I'll move approval of the consent agenda. I'll second. All right, we have a first by Councilor Martinez, seconded by Councilor Papen. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. Hearing none, motion carried. Item 6 on our agenda is the public comment. This is the time that we wish and invite anyone wanting to step up and speak about something that is not on our agenda. Lori, do you have any knowledge either online, via email, or folks wanting to speak for public comment?
Did not receive anything.
Okay. If you're
Maybe
online,
it'd be better when we get home. I don't know.
could you please, if you're with us on the Zoom call, please? All right, let the record show that no one in the has come forward for the public comment. So tonight we have 2 public hearings. The first one will be on ordinance number 489, and the second one is on ordinance number 490. We have a lot of folks who are here to speak on both of those items. And to get us started, I'll go ahead and turn this over to Lori for first read.
Thank you. The North Plains City Council will conduct a legislative public hearing on City File CPA 23-056 Housing Needs Analysis Update. The order of business will be as follows. The mayor will open the public hearing and ask if any of the councilors need to declare a conflict of interest. The mayor will request the staff report. The councilors may ask questions at any time during the public hearing. Any written correspondence submitted on behalf of this item will be included in the record. The applicant will be invited to present oral testimony first. The public will be invited to provide oral and written testimony on the proposed amendment, first by proponents, then opponents, and finally those that are neutral. Additional staff comments will then be presented. The mayor will then close the public hearing or continue the hearing to a date certain. If the mayor closes the public hearing, the mayor will call for council comments and discussion. Unless the hearing is continued, the council may reach a final decision tonight. If the hearing is continued, the council will make a final decision after continued hearing. In either case, a notice of the final decision will be mailed to all parties of the proceeding. Everyone who testifies is deemed to be a party to the proceeding and must provide their name and full mailing address. State law and city municipal code provide certain criteria that apply to the council's decision. Those criteria and findings of fact are in the city staff report. Public testimony should be limited to those criteria and findings of fact or to other city or state land use standards that the person testifying apply to the proposed land use action.
Thank you, Lori. Before I open up the public hearing, I also wanted to let folks that are on the Zoom for the public hearing, for both public hearings, if you wish to testify during the public hearing, all I ask you to do is raise your hand and we will call on you when the time comes. The chat feature on Zoom is not part of the public hearing. I'm sure that, I know that, you might have comments or questions, but we are asking you that if you do want to participate in the public hearing, you do need to raise your hand and wait to be called on so that we can have your testimony into the record. So at this time, I'll go ahead and open up the public hearing at 7:11. And then turn this over to Andy. Staff. Oh, excuse me. Are there any counselors that need to declare any conflict of interest? Okay, hearing none, then I'll go ahead and turn this over to Andy for the staff report.
Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor. I appreciate the comment about the chat. I'm trying to run the computer and the presentation and get folks' questions all at the same time and do a timer later. So that helps if folks just speak when the time comes at that time. However, if you can't hear us at any time or have an issue, a technical issue, please do let us know in the chat, and that is, we'll definitely respond to that. So thank you, Madam Mayor. The first hearing is going to be about Ordinance 489, the housing needs analysis, and Heather Austin from 3J Consulting is going to walk us through a bit of a presentation on that.
Thank you, Andy, and Mayor Lenahan. It's a pleasure to be here with you this evening. And Andy is just queuing up a few slides on the housing needs analysis. This is EPA file 23-056 sub 2. Sub 1 is the UGB hearing that we'll have later this evening. Both are thought to be hand in hand, I suppose, complementary proposals because the housing needs analysis does feed into the urban growth boundary expansion, but we'd like to take the housing needs analysis first because it is the necessary housing basis for the UGB. We'll get more into that. The other thing I'd like to mention is that this is the second time we've had a chance to do this presentation for you, so we've added a little more information to sort of clarify what's in the report and where the information comes from. But there is nothing new in the housing needs analysis from the last time you had a public hearing on this. We are coming back because of some public noticing issues. So we want to make sure that that's clear that we did not make any changes to the document that was in your packet this evening. With that, we can move forward on slideshow. So this 2022 housing needs analysis is an update to the 2017 housing needs analysis that this council approved. The reason that we are only 6 years into the process and have to update a 20-year document is because to be able to use the HNA as our basis for residential land use for the urban growth boundary, we are required by state law to use the most updated Portland State University population forecast and population estimates. And for Washington County, that occurred in 2020. So there was a change in the way population is estimated for all cities and incorporated county areas in Washington County. And therefore we had to update our numbers in our housing needs analysis to reflect that change. The underlying analysis and methodologies used to determine how much land need we may need moving forward and how much buildable land was within the city remain the same largely. Let's see, next slide, please. The document, I think that is the same that it was the last time you held this public hearing earlier this year, I believe in June. The 2017 HNA is different from the 2022 update in that it previously included some buildable land available in both Sunset Ridge and Bryn Hill. As we all know, Sunset Ridge is fully built out and Bryn Hill is fully approved and about half built out, or maybe more now. It's been a while since I've checked on that. So we are not able to count on any residential land build out to move forward in those areas, which leaves the city's buildable lands that are in the current urban growth boundary and the city limits very limited. Next slide, please. So in order to look at the H&A and use it as our basis of factual housing need for the UGB, we have to make sure that it plans for a wide variety of housing types for citizens of the city, both current and future. We need to evaluate how to accommodate for any deficits of housing. Again, the 2017 UGB did identify capacity for 558 dwelling units. Those were largely constructed or are approved for construction both in Sunset Ridge 2 and Bryn Hill. So the identified need of 1,348, those 558 are largely accounted for with a remaining need of 790 dwelling units. This results in a need for 167.4 acres to accommodate the residential land use UGB. And I'm going to explain how we get to that 167.4. So to identify how much land 790 dwelling units is going to need, we first have to make some assumptions about how we will develop that land. And one way we do that is think about the overall density. And in the housing use analysis, you'll see there's lower density development, that'd be like your R7.5 zoning district. There's some medium density, which would be your R5 zoning, and some higher density, which is your R2.5 zoning district. And of course, there's opportunities for a little bit of mixed use in your commercial zones. All of that is factored in to determine how much land we might need to be able to develop housing over the next 20 years. We also look at infrastructure such as streets, the right of way, the way that we get people in and out, sidewalks. We looked at parks and schools. We found no schools identified in the 20-year horizon. We talked with Hillsborough School District about that. And current schools in the city do have capacity to accommodate that growth. The parks accommodate parks that we found from the city's parks master plan does call for about 40 acres of that 167 acres that would be designated for parks. So what we have assumed is a housing split type of about 70% single family detached and 30% combination single family attached and multifamily. This is quite a bit denser than traditional development in North Plains that is currently 88%, or maybe a little less now that Bryn Hills developed some attached single family units, but it's still in the 80% range to down to 70% so that we're more efficiently using our residential land in the city. And in order to pursue an urban growth boundary expansion, we do have to demonstrate that we are implementing land use efficiency measures with it, which this council did approve in spring of 2021, several land use efficiency measures, including types of housing that you can build in your zones, restricting new single family detached from your R5 zoning district, and other ways that you can efficiently use the land that's within the city. And that will apply when you expand your urban growth boundary and put new residential land. So those land use efficiency measures not only affect the land that's in the city, that is very limited, but also moves forward into your urban growth boundary expansion. Next slide, please. That is the explanation of what's in the packet for the housing needs analysis. There's a staff report in your packet this evening too that's largely similar to what was in your packet in June of this year. We did update some of the findings to make sure we were addressing some of the questions and concerns that we've been hearing throughout the process. So those are all included within your packet this evening, as is the Planning Commission recommendation. They did hold a public hearing last month in August and recommend approval again to the City Council. So with that, staff and the Planning Commission recommend approval of this proposed housing needs analysis. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Hearing none. Okay, we'll go ahead and move on to invite the public up to provide oral and oral testimony on the proposed amendments. First, I don't think we have any proponents for the ordinance 489, but there is a gentleman who just arrived, and I'm not sure if you are wanting to speak on 489 or 490. Can you please?
Yeah.
Hi. Did you want to speak for or against ordinance 489? It's the housing needs analysis amendment.
Yes.
Okay, if you could come up to the table.
Would be against that border.
Are you, that's fine. Are you
Okay,
on the,
are you
against
sure?
HNA or the urban rural boundary?
Urban Growth Boundary.
Yeah. Okay.
So I can wait.
Yeah.
Hey,
I
Steve.
just got-
Yeah.
Steve,
Yeah.
is it on? It is?
Thank you.
Okay.
That'd be great.
Where's that?
Oh, they're, HNA, oh, yeah, they're, oh, yeah.
Okay, so I do have three cards up here, folks wishing to speak as opponents. So I'll go ahead and call them up. First is Katie Miller. Can you come up to the table if you can speak into the microphone and just state your name for the record and your address, please?
Right, sit.
Please.
My name is Katie Miller. I have a North Plains address, which is in the front that I filled out. First of all, I want to say that I'm not anti-housing. I am a proponent for the correct type of housing. In this case, that would include more apartment condos and multi-unit properties in general, with less of a dependency on single-family homes. I'm a proponent of housing that takes up less space and is not discriminatory against those who do not have high incomes or who are not in a traditional dual income family. Those most in need of housing are lower income, yet the proposed housing solution in North Plains are mostly single family homes. The starting price of homes in the most recent North Plains development, Bryn Hill, is $405,000, which is hardly affordable. The first property I purchased was a condo I bought myself 8 years ago. At the time, I was single and I couldn't afford to buy a single family house. Plus, it was just too much space for one person, nor did I have the bandwidth to maintain a large property. I have a college degree and simply had a lower paying job. Of course, I was not a criminal, and my neighbors were not either. It was a well-functioning and quiet community full of both professionals and retirees. This is simply one example that lower priced properties don't automatically bring big crime. Sorry. I mention this because I don't fully understand the decision to fully rely on single family housing, and I'm a huge proponent of multi-unit housing. Really well in the communities in the area. The only job listing that I saw on the North Plains community website was for an operations technician one. I think this was just it just closed about 2 days ago, but the pay range was $16.85 to $21.44 an hour. This individual would not be able to afford any of the new housing that you are planning to build, the single detached housing, or maybe even the attached. So who will be able to afford these? It will be Intel families. Once again, Intel is doing a multi-billion-dollar expansion in Hillsborough and will bring both out-of-state and out-of-country families into the area. And that's who will be buying these houses. It doesn't really solve our current housing crisis of those already here in the state of Oregon who need housing. I believe a higher emphasis on multi-unit housing needs to be incorporated into the current plan. Reliance on single-family homes is not smart. It makes us a colony for Intel. It doesn't focus on the people who are currently here in Oregon who are in truth. Thank you.
Very much. I did fail to mention that we will have a 5-minute time. And have it demonstrated. It'll be up on the screen. So the next up to is Jackie Dyke Jones.
Good evening, Mayor Linehan and city councilors. My name is Jackie Dyke Jones. I'm a steward of the land and a fourth-generation family farmer, providing food and fiber for Oregonians and beyond. So I'm a retired classroom teacher, and today was the first day of school. So I'd like to share with you an amazing Oregon Ag in the Classroom literacy project story called Before We Eat. It puts a face on farming, letting kids know that their food didn't magically appear in the supermarket, but came to them through the work of real people. A good beginning look at where our food comes from. Quoted by Amy Kotler, author of The Locavore Way and the Farm School Cookbook. So as Katie had mentioned, I'm also not opposed to efficient and economical, affordable, environmentally sustainable housing. Without farmland, there's no ice cream, burgers, blackberry pie, grass for playgrounds, or insert your favorite thing. Farmland is finite. What about the soils, the carbon sequestration, oxygen, food, fiber providing working lands? Metro, for example, has more than enough buildable land in its boundaries for its 20-year housing supply. The limiting factor is infrastructure. So if the bedroom community of North Plains is saying that they need additional housing land to balance the revenue, all I'm seeing is that it will be more expensive for home buyers and renters. Land outside this land, what I'm finding is that what I know is that the housing developments in North Plains were constructed by Florida home builders. And during the House Bill 3414, I asked if they were going to at least promote like Oregon or more local builders, and they were like, nope, no guarantee at all. And everyone should be disgusted with the 30% to be affordable. That's an F grade. So I see this as a squandering of our non-renewable resources and food systems. I'm encouraging you to please reconsider the addition of the housing needs analysis.
Thank you. Next up is Nellie McAdams.
Mayor Lenahan, city councilors, thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Excuse me, could you state your name for the record, please?
Not to do that.
Thank you.
I'm Nellie McAdams. My address is on the record and I testify as a private individual in opposition to the HNA. First, it overlooks buildable and underdeveloped land. The HNA's map considers most of the land in the UGB, including large residential lots, to be fully developed. It overlooks large parcels of undeveloped land, and it claims some categories of buildable land have zero buildable lots, despite their proximity to city center. The city's urban planning area agreement with Washington County does not include any of the land to the west or far southeast corner for inclusion in the UGB. It does include the low density area and airport southwest of town, yet the HNA claims this area as an exclusion area. Second, the HNA does far too little to encourage infill. The HNA recommends many ways to increase housing options that North Plains has not yet taken. This includes mixed commercial residential, which North Plains does not allow despite the fact that it was the most requested housing type in the survey for the downtown improvement plan. Third, the HNA would result in unaffordable, expensive disturbance housing that wastes farmland. It repeatedly states that North Plains has a deficit of affordable and multifamily housing, stating a household earning median family income could afford a home up to $258,000, which is below North Plains' median single-family home price of $337,000. Both are less than the starting price of homes in Bryn Hill. The HNA does very little to change the status quo and would result in 84% of total housing being single-family detached compared to 61% for Washington County. Not only is single-family detached housing unaffordable to most buyers, it's unaffordable to the city, as the HNA notes. If improving its cash flow is the city's goal, it should not sprawl itself into debt, but build inward. Fourth, the city erroneously ties its growth to Metro. Despite being outside Metro, it plans to grow like Hillsborough. Yet Metro's 2040 plan names North Plains as part of a rural greenbelt. The 2022 EOA touted the land here as 30% cheaper than large neighboring cities. That's because North Plains is outside Metro and not intended for such urbanization. And just because the land is affordable to the developer does not mean that the housing will be affordable to the buyer of the city. Cheap land only increases developers' margins, and providing windfalls to landowners and developers is not a public interest, nor is it a Goal 14 factor for UGB expansion. The city cannot at the same time skirt Metro's growth protocol and grow as if it were inside Metro. For these reasons and more, I urge you to vote no on the HNA.
Thank you very much. And last up, I think this is it Isla Heifer? Heifer? I'm sorry.
That's cute, it's Ayla. Wouldn't be the first time I've called a heifer, and, I'm proud to be U.S. Marines. So, I wasn't gonna talk tonight, but, I just said, same thing before, and I'll say it again.
Would you be so kind and just tell me, just state your name for the record?
I'm sorry, yeah, it's Ayla Hoffler, I live in Banks,
Thank you.
and I'm your neighbor. And my family lives in North Plains, and my kids all went to school here. And long ago in the dark ages, I had a job with like Lori's here. Anyway, the thing is, just because Portland State can tell us all their numbers, we don't have to do it. People are allowed to say, no, not here. And I think people need to stand up for their community and know what they want here. If we want to stay single family residences, we should do so. That's where you have a yard, you can see the stars at night, those kinds of things. That's what we do here, besides farm. And so here's the deal. I might have a question. If you have an old house in North Plains right now and you tear it down to replace it, are you going to tell them they have to have multiple dwellings on that land? Is that going to be the new infill rules? You can't replace your single family residence?
Heather, can you, can she respond to you after your testimony?
Yeah, because that is a burning question. And, secondly, I've said this before, the reason why we don't have affordable land and affordable housing is because our government owns 70% of this state. And today, Washington County just spent $1.4 million for 2 tax lots in Forest Grove for the homeless. Okay? Well, maybe they ought to start subsidizing normal people that go to work for a living. Maybe we ought to change the whole model of where some of the money gets shifted back to the people that make, an average wage, helping the blue collar people get caught up. You want to talk about geographic equity? Well, let's start right here. Build single family residences, give people a yard where they can have their pets and kids safe. And let's get some government help then. Why do we have to draw inside the PSU box? I disagree totally. I don't want to see these high density places where people are on top of each other. We are not white rats. We are not an experiment for the government to pack us in like this when we have all this gorgeous land. And I hope you change the slides to reflect what's really farmland versus forestry land, because that's a very delusional thing to show people to think we have all this room to go through. We don't.
Thank you very much. Heather, would you like to respond?
Sure, just to answer the question, that if you have a single family detached home and you decide to remove it, it's not an act of nature or whatever, and you are in the R2.5 zoning district, that is our highest density zoning district, you would not be able to rebuild single family detached. Because the city has made the determination that those are the zones in which we want to see a higher density. And there is 70% of the city available in the future planning for single family detached. So those aren't the areas that are designated for that.
So all the little houses down here in Cottage and all our little houses in the county.
The exact majority is not R2.5 in those areas. So yes, you would be able to rebuild the ones that are done R7.5 and R5.
So what if you bought it before it was going to 2.5? Are you not going to grandfather in their existing?
They are grandfathered in.
So
Yes,
all of this
absolutely.
needs to be on the record.
Yeah.
Oh,
It's
sorry.
not a
Sorry,
comical.
I just,
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I appreciate you putting it on the record, because I think people don't know that.
I'll just respond to the question that if you are in a detached home in the R2.5 zone, currently you are considered a permitted use.
Thank you very much, Heather. Looks like we have another person to testify as an opponent for the HMA, Greg Malinowski.
Greg Malinowski. 1345 Northwest Springville Lane, Portland, Oregon, 97229. I just want to echo what some of the speakers have said. And I really feel for the last speaker. This was a town of single family residential. And it was in a county of 160,000 people. And we're not that anymore. We're 600,000. There's a reason they don't build ranch style homes on Manhattan Island. Because there's no room and too many people. So my concern has been that you've got to have, I submitted testimony somewhat to that effect, that if you've got to have $600,000 or $700,000 to buy a single family residential, because our metropolitan area is, pushing between 2 and 3 million people, then you need to have your 20% down. So you need to have about, 120,000 or so in cash. And then you can get a mortgage for the rest of it as long as you have, $200,000 a year in family income. And you can go ahead and afford that. I've heard a lot of people say we need more housing for our children. We do, but I'm not going to embarrass my son much by saying this, but the fact is he can't afford a $600,000 home either. And so if he wants to have a place, it's going to be multifamily, or he's going to sleep in his car. That's where we're at. I also don't like the idea that we are continually looking at housing for non-residents. And that's going to be 40 to 50% of your housing will be for non-residents. North Plains has made an argument saying that they're not part of the metro region. Well, in that case, you need to be planning for the people who currently work in North Plains, I think. And the key is those people, a lot of them can't afford $600,000 homes either. If you look at the homes that have been built in the last 5 to 8 years in North Plains, it'd be interesting to see how many were over the price of $500,000 are actually being purchased by people who work in this community. So I think the city has to decide whether they're going to provide housing for the people who work in their city. And that's what I think you need to do at a minimum. You need to increase the amount of affordable housing, even if it's multifamily, in order to cover what that people who work here can afford. And if most of the people who have moved in $500,000 and up homes don't actually work in this community, then maybe you're not targeting what the community needs. And just wanted to throw that in there. It's a mathematical thing. It doesn't matter if you have a ton of single family residential, if you have to have $225,000 a year in family income to get a mortgage. It just doesn't matter. And yes, there are some people who can afford it. But by and large, they're not the rank and file who do the hardest work. And I would just like to see North Plains retarget for the people who work in the city and don't want to drive an hour to get here because they can't afford a place to live any closer. And that's my 2 cents. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else wishing to speak on the housing needs analysis? Ordinance number 489. I've seen anyone online that wishing to provide testimony? No?
Mayor, I'm not.
No. Okay. Heather, additional comments, please.
Thank you, Mayor Lincoln. I think just the additional comments I have, thank you to everybody who provided testimony. I think hearing both sides of the discussion about what type of housing North Plains should target moving forward really puts the spotlight on what the job was to create this housing needs analysis, and that is to balance the needs of the current community and the future community, and making sure that we are respecting what North Plains is, which is a small city that wants to be more independent, but lacks things like transit and other services that support people in higher density situations in larger quantities. But that also, we want to provide housing for people who work here, but we want to provide also jobs to the people who live here. So we're planning the future and we're planning for the current residents by changing the mix a little bit to say, yes, we need to have fewer single family detached as an overall percentage moving forward, but we still need to respect that this city is primarily a small city on the urban fringe. So that balancing act is what the housing needs analysis represents, and it takes in all of those perspectives, which we have heard through the process of creating the document. I think that's all I really have to say about that, unless there's questions for me.
And remind me, the planning commission is doing the work to consider other types of housing options in North Plains, correct?
Yes, so in 2021, we did change the development code to expand what types of housing are permitted in each of the zones. And that includes things like duplexes and triplexes and more townhomes without needing to come to the planning commission. Those are now permitted uses. So they did remove a lot of barriers to building types of housing that are different than single family detached. The state does require those types of things of larger cities, but North Plains, by and large, does not fall into that category. Now, this summer, the state law did change those cities over 2,500 are required to meet the duplex standards that this city has already put into place. So you were ahead of the curve on that as far as allowing duplexes in the same size lots as single family detached. So yes, the city has been doing the work to provide more housing opportunities and to remove barriers to building different types of housing.
Great, thank you. Any other questions from council? Comments? All right, one last call before I close the public hearing. Are there any additional comments from anyone in the room regarding ordinance number 489? All right, hearing none, I'm going to go ahead and close the public hearing then at 7:43. This is the time now, council, if you have any additional comments or questions, any discussions, how would you like to move forward?
Well, I'll make a couple comments, and then I'm going to make a motion. And my comments are related to the folks who we represent, which are the people inside this community. And we have to think about their interest and the interest of our community going forward. We have to think about a future, and we have basically a mandate from the state to think about, you know, what's the look forward in a 20-year period. And I think we've been thoughtful and deliberate about that. So I feel good about where we're headed. And, you know, I know that there's not always agreement, and there can be some dissension about this, but nonetheless, I'm pretty resolute in moving forward and moving this particular ordinance forward. And so I would make a motion to basically move the first reading of the ordinance 489, that's city file number CPA 23056, parenthesis 2, adopting the updated housing needs analysis by title only.
I will second.
Okay, we have a first by Councilor Sheldon, seconded by Councilor Page. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. Hearing none, motion carried. So ordinance number 489 is an ordinance of the City Council of the City of North Plains, Oregon, adopting an updated housing needs analysis. Now, can I have a motion to approve the first reading of ordinance 489?
I'll move to approve the first reading by title only of ordinance 489.
I'll second. All right, we have a motion on the table by Councilor Sheldon, seconded by Councilor Chris Friedman. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. Hearing none, motion carried. Thank you. All right, next on our agenda is the 7B. It is the introduction and first reading of ordinance 490, the urban growth boundary expansion. Yes or no? Thank you. The North Plains City Council will conduct a legislative public hearing on City File CPA 23-056 (1), North Plains Urban Growth Boundary Amendment and Comprehensive Plan Text Amendment. The order of business will be as follows. The mayor will open the public hearing and ask if any of the councilors need to declare a conflict of interest. The mayor will request the staff report. The councilors may ask questions at any time during the public hearing. Any written correspondence submitted on behalf of this item has been included in the record. The staff will be invited to present oral testimony first. The public will then be invited to provide oral or written testimony on the proposed amendment, first by proponents, then opponents, and finally by those that are neutral. Additional staff comments will then be presented. The mayor will then close the public hearing or continue the hearing to a date certain. If the mayor closes the public hearing, the mayor will call for council comments and discussion. Unless the hearing is continued, the council may reach a final decision tonight. If the hearing is continued, the council will make a final decision at the continued hearing. In either case, a notice of the final decision will be mailed to all parties to the proceeding. Everyone who testifies is deemed to be a party to the proceeding and must provide their name and full mailing address. State law and city municipal code provide certain criteria that apply to the council's decision. Those criteria and findings of fact are in the city staff report. Public testimony should be limited to those criteria and findings of fact, or to other state or city land use standards that the person testifying believes apply to the proposed land use action. Great, thank you, Lori. So again, before we get started, before I open the public hearing, I do want to remind the folks on Zoom that if you do wish to testify either way, I need you to use the raise your hand feature. And when we get to testimony, we will call on you. Otherwise, the chat feature, if you have questions or comments, in the chat feature, that's not part of the public hearing. And again, if you want to testify, I need you to raise your hand and we will call on you shortly. At this time, I'll go ahead and open up the public hearing at 7:49 p.m. and ask the council, are there any conflicts of interest for this topic? Hearing none, we'll go ahead and move to the staff report. Andy.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Bear with me as I hide all this gobbledygook out of the way. Okay. Good evening, folks. Thanks everyone for being here tonight. I'm the city manager, Andy Varner. For those standing, apologies. All the chairs are used, but there still are a few more up front. If you feel like going up front, I was certainly in school at one point. I would have never gone up in front, so I understand if you don't want to. But there are 4 or 5 up there. So we're moving on now to, let me hide this. Ordinance 490, we're getting to the urban growth boundary expansion report in the comprehensive plan update. So in the packet attached to ordinance 490 are the UGB report that's also going to be referred to sometimes as a goal 19 or a goal 14 report, excuse me. and also the comprehensive plan update, because when we do an urban growth boundary expansion or an EOA or an HNA, you're amending the comprehensive plan. So we're going to have a kind of a group effort by a few members of staff tonight to walk through some of the issues surrounding 490. The areas we're going to cover are the findings and the recommendation regarding the expansion, the report, all the research and analysis done over the last few years, and that which the Planning Commission recommended and forwarded to you just last month. Present additional Goal 14 findings. Again, that's the urbanization findings. Recognize some of the comment themes that we've been hearing the last couple months running through the Planning Commission and now to the City Council. Clarification of Senate Bill 4 semiconductor urban growth boundary issue. We've discussed that in previous meetings, but the City Council, we haven't really addressed that topic for you in this round of hearings. Talk a little bit about undesignated lands and reserves context, and then the schedule for the process moving forward. Heather, this is you.
So thank you, Mayor Linehan. It's my job to run through the process for establishing the UGB area and talking through what's in the UGB report and how we got to where we are today. So I will just present that. I know, again, we presented this to you before. The UGB report is largely the same. We made some changes to some mapping to make some clarifications, didn't change the boundary except to just be more clear about what we were talking about. So we'll go over that as well. But same information is in your urban growth boundary report as was in the previous land use hearings that you conducted. We have also, like the HNA, added findings that we'll discuss as well. So to begin this process, we did have a project advisory committee that met I believe 8 times to talk about the UGB and how and where we should grow. The dash red line on this map is 1 mile buffer surrounding the current UGB for the city of North Plains. But the green areas, and I'm sorry, they're so similar to the gray. Green areas are undesignated lands, so did not get either an urban or rural designation. The gray area is all designated rural reserves, so could not consider any of the gray parcels because they are designated to remain rural reserves into the future. So we could only look at the green parcels and then the hash mark areas, which is part of what we consider an exclusion area. Next slide, please. So how we determined how much of those green parcels that we needed to look at. We needed to figure out what the total land need was, and we did that by looking at our economic opportunities analysis, which was adopted by the City Council last November. We looked at the housing needs analysis, which you just approved this evening, but we've had those numbers for quite a while now that we've been basing this information on. And then we looked at capacity of the current UGB, which we talked about in the previous hearing, including those land use efficiency measures that were adopted in spring of 2022. If we can just go back one, I do need to mention about the hashed area that we excluded. That is the air acres area. There's an airstrip through the middle. Thank you for the finger there. There are CCNR and development capacity. There's homes on those lots that between the CCNRs and the development of the homes made it so that we could not count on it for future expansion. If we did, it would be residential. The city does not find it appropriate to expand to the south of Highway 26 for residential land, so that area has been excluded in the UGB report. Okay, advance 2, please. So once we determine that we need about 855 acres of land, we need to look at where that land should be. We took the urban growth boundary study area and divided into geographic sub areas shown here by color. And what we needed to do was analyze each of those areas with the metrics that the state requires us to look at, which are listed 1 through 4 there on your screen. We had to go through, and those are all in your report, analyze each area for how well they can efficiently accommodate the land needs that we identified, what orderly and economic divisions of public facilities and services could occur in each of these areas, how we compare environmental, energy, economic, and social consequences to development of these areas, and then compatibility with nearby agricultural and forest activities, which we'll hear more about. Next slide, please. So what the Project Advisory Committee and the Planning Commission, once they have their public hearing as well, have recommended, same as what you saw previously. We've just colored in the area so it's a little more obvious what the UGB area looks like. So this is the first time you'll be seeing this map because we just produced this last week. So the purple colored in areas are reflective of the UGB expansion area. The boundary has not changed, just the shading of the area. So again, we looked at the areas in the green outline. That was our study area. We didn't need to bring in the full amount of the land. That was a total of somewhere around 1,600 acres. We needed 855. So the purple areas are where the first the Project Advisory Committee and then the Planning Commission recommended that the city expand. So I will note on this slide that this purple area represents an adequate supply of land for 20 years for North Plains, and that is for both residential and commercial industrial growth, in addition to parkland, and as we said, no school land is required. The urban growth boundary designation is not the same as an annexation or a development. So we do not anticipate all of this land to develop within the first 5 years, 10 years. This is a 20-year land supply. What we are doing is making the planning effort now to determine how the city can grow over the next 20 years and what areas it will grow into, which allows you to better allocate your resources for planning and determine where and how you lay out your roads and your utilities. And it gives you a certainty of how you need to do your planning moving forward. So the question has come up of, do we need to designate all of our 20-year land units at a time? We believe we do, because that is the only efficient way to make sure that we're getting what the city needs to be able to grow appropriately throughout the next 20-year cycle. I believe next slide, please. In addition to the urban growth boundary report, your packet contains an updated version of the comprehensive plan. We did go through and update the sections that were pertinent to the UGB expansion. In 2022, we did update what's considered Goal 9, economic development. The comprehensive plan, like most comprehensive plans in the state of Oregon, is based on the Oregon statewide planning goals. And so when we make a change to any of those long-range planning documents, we do need to make sure that it's in compliance with our comprehensive plan, or we're updating our comprehensive plan. So Goal 9, Oregon statewide planning Goal 9 says that you have to adequately plan for economic development lands in your city. You have to make sure that you're meeting those needs. We did that in November of 2022. Goal 10 is updated in this document, and that's related to housing development within a city. And then the biggest update you'll see is Goal 14, and you'll hear that over and over again, and you've heard it from Andy. Goal 14 is the urbanization goal, so how a city grows, how urban growth boundary areas are designated, and what goes into making those designations. I believe that is everything for that slide. Next slide, please. Oh, and now I'm handing it over to Pat to talk to you about the supplemental findings.
Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. For this work.
Yeah, it works.
Just a little background. I've been helping the city on the UGB expansion effort, but for a little bit of background, my company is PR Management Strategies. Prior to being a planning consultant, I worked with the city of Hillsborough as a planning director up until a few years ago. But I do have a long background in both land use here and in Hawaii, and licensed in Washington. Just a little bit of background. And as part of the effort for Hillsborough, I, as a planning director, managed most of this, the expansion that people have seen over the last several years. So let me go back to the Goal 14 issue. at the planning commission level, there were written testimony and some oral testimony about whether the work done to satisfy Goal 14, which is a prerequisite to allow a UGB expansion, whether that work was sufficient in terms of covering what Goal 14 requires as far as demonstrating a land need and demonstrating that the areas that are chosen or proposed for UGB expansion meet Goal 14 location factor. So a lot of that discussion, we're here tonight just to sort of confirm. A lot of that discussion occurred at the planning commission level. We're here tonight to just kind of confirm that we've done that work. That work has been done. The Goal 14 land need. Can we go to the next slide, please? The HNA, which was approved tonight, and the EOA, which was approved earlier, approved by the council, does that. It demonstrates the need for additional housing, 167 acres. And in terms of the EOA, demonstrates the need for the industrial land as we see here. And by the way, the EOA is acknowledged by LCDC, and the HNA will probably be, after this adoption, go before the LCDC for acknowledgement. But the significance of acknowledgement is that the need that's defined in there, as you see in that slide, is not challengeable. It is a need that's legitimately the city can pursue. These two studies, these two reports, the HNA and the EOA, addresses the Goal 14 land need factors. Next slide. Goal 14 also has what's called location factors. It gets a little bit complicated, but the same has happened. So I've listed there 4 bullets. They're all in the record for the council tonight. And these 4 documents that's in the record address the 4 factors. I just wanted to make sure that the record and all of you know that the Goal 14 location factors have been addressed, and the findings are there as well in those 4 listed documents. Next slide. This is just a more legalistic way to say we've done the job relative to Goal 14. And if you see in that last toward the bottom where you can find these findings, the rules, Goal 14 requires that you consider these factors and you balance them. You can see in the slide where in these reports all of that has happened. Next slide. So, what does it mean to have a stat? How do you measure whether you've satisfied the goal? These are the 2 standards that LCDC will apply to determine, in their view, whether we've satisfied Goal 14. We believe that's been done. We have the documentation for it. And so we'll see where that goes. That's where we are. And thank you.
Thanks, Pat. Bill is going to start a summary of some of the comments that we've heard to continue on.
Thank you, Andy. Okay, so in the packet and the information you've gotten up until or before the hearing, we have had a number of comments that have come in support, in opposition, and neutral to the UGB expansion proposal. So I just want to, they're all in there, but I want to just kind of run through a quick summary of what we've heard, what you've read and heard, and then kind of go through some of the comments in opposition and our response. And I don't want to take up too much time because there's just so much. As far as in favor of the UGB proposal, These 4 points really kind of summarize what we heard really repeatedly. And I really, in support of the economic and fiscal balancing of the city, I want to point out that that in particular property owners from all sides of the urban growth boundary expansion area, in particular during the planning commission hearing, many of them came in and gave verbal testimony, didn't just submit letters, but gave verbal testimony. This slide was actually made for review for the planning commission to hear about things, about comments and support. Well, at the planning commission, points 2 and 3 here were very pronounced in terms of how we heard from and who we heard from in terms of supporters from within the city and from outside. So I just want to underscore that particular point. You can go ahead and advance to the next one, please. So I'm going to go through some comments and themes that we heard from a number of different places, and they kind of all have some similarities. So we just want to tie them together and summarize them. PC hearing, it was not noticed properly. The May 2023 PC hearing was not noticed properly in the newspaper. This whole process of going back through a planning commission hearing to rehear all of this, and then a city council hearing to rehear all of this, is remedy to that issue. So that's a resolved issue as far as things are concerned. Those outside of the traditional, second comment, those outside of the traditional notice area were not noticed and informed of this process. All along the city, as far as the UGB hearings process, has noticed appropriately for its ordinance. And that means that property owners within 250 feet of an area under consideration for comprehensive plan or zoning map amendment change are the ones who were required to notice of these types of proceedings. And we have done that every single time. We have a lot of people who have made this comment who are well outside of the study area and, distant neighbors of the city, so to speak. But the reality is that under the law, those people well outside of our study area are no different than somebody in John Day or somebody who lives in Ontario. It's not the city's legal responsibility to notice well outside of where we're required. So comments here are welcome, but going beyond is not within the charge of the city. So we just wanted to make that clear. Next slide, please. Expansion area that we're considering is of the highest quality soil, and there will be impacts to farming were not adequately addressed, and farmland is going to be lost. I'll get into this issue in a little bit more detail later. But for the planning commission, we went into this, and like I said, I'll talk about it a bit. But urban reserves law and what is kind of thrown around as the grand bargain legislation from 2014 very specifically considered all of this land around North Plains and the undesignated lands around North Plains that we are looking at for expansion were not set aside and given 50-year protection as rural reserves, which means that the process set aside land for North Plains to explicitly consider for future urbanization when the time came and it was appropriate to do that. So we're hearing comments about farmland, but the reality is we're playing within the area that the legislature gave us to look at for future urbanization. So it is appropriate for us to consider that area. And frankly, soil quality and all of those things were considered in the urban reserves process. And yet the city was still given this area to plan for urbanization. So I just want to make that point. Number 4. There's confusion or comment about SB4, the Semiconductor Act, with the governor's authority with the UGB and expansion. The city attorney is going to address that in a little bit, but we want to be clear about that, and that's soon. Next slide, please. Okay, the irrigation district. Walton Valley Irrigation District submitted comments into the record along the lines of easements on the west side of North Plains and the expansion area there would be threatened by development, and that would be a problem. And that should be studied or that should be an objection to urbanization. Into the record for the planning commission hearing, and therefore as part of this hearing, the record has a legal review by the city attorney, and the easements that are on the west side, in the west side expansion area for the irrigation district, those easements can be respected as is, or there's a formal process for moving them. And so we've concluded that there's no negative impact to easements and irrigation on the west side for our planning purposes. So there's a process to follow if things need to be moved, and some may very well need to. And finally, as we heard during the H&A hearing a little while ago, there's been comment about the fact that Air Acres, the exclusion area south of Highway 26 in our undesignated area, our study area, the residential development that surrounds the airstrip, that was excluded with close coordination, frankly, with DLCD about whether that land adds capacity for the city and then should be brought into the UGB. And with DLCD coordination, it was determined that that area provides no capacity for future development. And therefore isn't capacity for the city, and therefore it should be excluded from consideration for UGB expansion. So it is not included in this UGB expansion.
Okay. Yeah, I'll go through a couple more here. Another opposition comment was the engagement with the public has been insufficient with this process. So I want to go back in history a little bit. To 8 years ago, 2015, that's when the city, with a grant from the state, kicked off the North Plains Vision 2035 process. And the reason you see 2035 is because this started in 2015 for a 20-year growth horizon. That was 8 years ago. We're still planning for 20 years right now. But at that time, the city and the community, as you see here, had envisioned sufficient employment, land, housing, and responsible city services, businesses, infrastructure, because at that time, the city knew that our buildable lands inventory was running out. So they needed to start the planning process for that, knowing that it's going to take several years to get to the point where we are now. So I just want to be clear, that started 8 years ago and had its own process of doing the housing needs analysis, economic opportunities analysis. When I started this job and got to the interview in Halloween of 2017, the city had just adopted an H&A then. We've just done another one. We are adopting an economic opportunities analysis later that year. We just did another one. So this is a continual planning process to try to stay ahead of these 20-year land supplies. And COVID and everything kind of slowed down the process. But as you see now, and Heather mentioned earlier, we're out of buildable land in the city. So we do have an obligation to have that 20-year supply for employment and housing needs. Also, kind of piggybacking off of that effort of the Vision North Plains 2035 was the city council passing a resolution in 2021 with 4 economic priorities, economic development goals. And I won't read all of these, but these are really in response to community surveys. Our economic development committee doing a community survey, surveying the business community about what sort of economic development future we want to have for the community. And a lot of that really comes down to, you can call it a bedroom community, ex-urban, satellite, but I think it's really a lot about providing more services to the community, an underserviced community. It's a town of 3,500 people with few services, therefore forcing a lot of people onto the highway and driving further, not just for employment, for just basic services. So the council is really focused on trying to reverse some of those trends. And to do that, that was really the thrust of the economic opportunities analysis that was ultimately passed and acknowledged at the end of 2022. And then, so I just kind of covered some of these multiple H&As and EOAs that have been adopted over the last few years. And then Heather talked earlier about the updated PSU 2020 population forecast and our current UGB expansion efforts as a result of that. And then in your packet, we kind of summarized some of the different public communications efforts, doing newsletter articles, social media posts, PAC meetings, public meetings, FAQs, news articles, a project webpage on the UGB, and we've had someone that's in opposition to the process has been very great. Has been very gracious to work with us whenever they find you missed this part in here on your webpage. Please update that. So we've been doing that. We've produced a voluminous, I guess, amount of web pages and documents over these last, as you can see, 8 years now. So it's good that people have some understanding when we miss, a word here and there to update. But just to show that, again, when I started at this city, my interview panels were full of talk of urban growth boundary and economic development. This is not a new subject. We've been talking about this month after month, year after year. So I just want that to be on the record too. Nearby farming interests have not been adequately notified. That was another comment in opposition. And again, to Bill's point, for us, nearby farming interests are those affected property owners in the study area, that the map that we showed earlier, the ones that are adjacent to the city that we're really considering for bringing into the urban growth boundary. We've had frequent notification and contact with those folks for a few years now. And you can see here to date, 18 different properties, 16 of which are actively farmed, have expressed more than once written verbal support and testimony over the course of these few years, including at the Planning Commission last month. There have been questions. Now we move on to neutral. People just kind of asking questions. Is the city planning for infrastructure or utilities? Because that's a big question. It's a big question when you do an urban growth boundary expansion of this size. But as a city of our size, less than 5,000 people, with its own UGB, not within the metro urban growth boundary, we're not required to conduct that sort of rigorous infrastructure and utilities plan as part of the expansion planning. We'll do that starting later this fall with the help of the state, ODOT and DLCD grant, where we'll start the comprehensive planning of those UGB areas. And then we'll start the planning of the infrastructure and doing the finance planning. And not only that, getting back to some of the comments earlier about the housing needs analysis, that's when we can look at some of the master planning and the concept planning of these growth areas to plan for more density, innovation, housing types that the city hasn't had before because we have no land. The city council has been passing things for different housing types, different diversity. So is the Planning Commission, but we don't have land to test that out on. So this is our opportunity to do that comprehensive planning and the concept planning in the next growth phase. And additionally, getting pointedly to the utilities question, we have communications from PGE, Tualatin Valley Water District, as well as Joint Water Commission, Clean Water Services, the sewer provider, sanitation provider out here, into the record verifying their ability and willingness to serve North Plains UGB expansion areas. In the case of PGE, they've expressed the need for acreage within the UGB area for operations and the substations. So we've had contact with those groups over the last couple of years and involved in their planning efforts for the region. And here, Chris will talk a bit about SB4.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. I just wanted to touch base on this briefly because it's come up that somehow Senate Bill 4 either has to be considered as part of this process or what else talked to can't be considered by City Council as part of this process. As a legal matter, it simply is a separate process entirely that exists entirely outside of our land use planning program. Senate Bill 4 itself authorizes the governor to designate 6 sites around the state for to be brought inside an urban growth boundary and be made available for industrial uses, specifically semiconductor and related uses. But it says in making those decisions and bringing those inside the UGB, that decision is completely outside the state's land use planning laws, the state's land use planning goals, the administrative rules, local comprehensive plans, and land use regulations. And secondly, once the land's brought in, the affected local government has to then go ahead and plan for it and do public facility
plans and roads and zone for it and everything. And those too are completely exempted from the state land use planning laws, the statewide land use planning goals, the administrative rules to implement those goals, and local comp plan land use regulations. It has whatever the governor does with Senate Bill 4 is completely outside any land use planning program, including this decision here tonight. The other thing that's important to keep in mind is, as far as I know, that process is a black box. Nobody I talk to has any idea where the governor is going to designate these 6 sites, and they may not be anywhere near North Plains or in Washington County at all. So it's really, it's just entirely speculative. There is no meaningful way to incorporate Senate Bill 4 into your industrial land needs, because nobody knows what the governor's going to do with that. And may or may not be in this area, may be outside Washington County entirely. And in any event, it's a decision the governor makes. It's completely outside the land use planning program, whereas this decision tonight has to be made consistent with the statewide land use planning goals, with your local comprehensive plan, and so on. So they're completely apples and oranges, and it's frankly a distraction to even bring up Senate Bill 4 as part of this discussion.
Okay, we're on the home stretch here. A couple more minutes.
All right. So back to the topic I mentioned a little while ago, and that is the undesignated lands around North Plains. We'll get to a map in just a moment, but House Bill 4078 in 2014, signed by Governor Kitzhaber, basically enshrined into law urban reserves, rural reserves, and undesignated lands, including in Washington County. And North Plains, of course, is in Washington County, but it's not in the Portland Metro UGB. Doesn't touch it, so it's surrounded by what's called undesignated lands. But in that law, urban reserves were set up in Washington County, about 13,500 acres of urban reserves that were designated as high priority areas for urbanization, primarily adjacent to the Portland Metro UGB. Okay. And what that means is that with that law, the Portland Metro UGB can kind of not fast track, but has kind of a clear, more expedited path to expanding urban growth boundary in certain places. The other designation that primarily came out of that legislation, the Grand Bargain legislation in 2014, are what are called rural reserves. The legislation set aside over 150,000 acres, over 151,000 acres of land in Washington County that cannot be urbanized, that have to be preserved for ag or just natural area for 50 years, starting the clock ticking with legislation in 2014. But all of that land is off limits from urbanization. So those are kind of the two primary, the key designations that were set up in the legislation. And those are that's the acreage of in Washington County alone of urban reserve versus rural reserve. I'm going to move forward in. Now around both of the cities of North Plains and Banks, a certain amount of land was not designated either urban reserves for somewhat fast track or quicker urban boundary expansion process, and that land around North Plains and Banks as undesignated is also not set aside and protected for 50 years as rural reserves, okay? Long-term protected for agriculture or other non-urban uses, okay? During the process of urban reserves designations from between 2008 and 2011, the region went through the process of figuring out where these lands should be and why, and the process involved cities, property owners, governments, residents, and stakeholders, partners, government agencies. It was a gigantic effort. And North Plains during the process made it clear from 2008 till 2014, it wanted the right to be able to grow some onto land that wouldn't be protected for 50 years from any kind of urbanization. It didn't want to be locked up and have no ability to expand its urban growth boundary if it needed to. And the urban reserves process and ultimately the legislation that ended the whole process enshrined that for the city of North Plains. There are roughly 1,600 acres that are undesignated immediately around the city that the process from A to Z granted to the North Plains to be able to urbanize. You can go ahead and move forward then. Plan for urbanization. And just to make it clear, we'll get into the map for a second, but the process looked at soil quality, the process looked at farming, the process looked at key sectors in farming, it looked at a bunch of different things regarding agriculture. The issue of urban reserves designation and the law that was enshrined at the very end of it is that we have the region, the state directed the region to find places to let cities grow, even though everybody knows those areas might be important agriculture areas. But the process was meant to yield a bit of area to grow relative to how much was long-term protected for agriculture. And that the land around North Plains is that area that was set aside for potential urbanization. Now, since the Planning Commission meeting and the hearing back in August, where we dug into this with these slides, we received a letter jointly signed by former Washington County Board Chair Tom Bryan and former Washington County Chair Board Andy Dyke. They were the county. Now, I might also mention, when Tom Bryan was county chair from 1999 to 2011, that was prior to Andy Dyke being the county board chair. He was actually the representative to the county board for the Western Washington County, including North Plains. So during the urban reserves process, he was directly involved as the representative for North Plains on the county board. But Tom Bryan was the chair at that time. And then after Tom Bryan retired, Andy Dyke became county board chair. They jointly submitted this letter of support into our record, confirming the information that I just provided to you and I provided the Planning Commission in those previous slides. They led the process. In fact, former chair Tom Bryan was on the committee of 4 members that ran the reserves planning process from 2008 to 2011. And it was him that spoke with North Plains leadership and was directly involved with everybody involved in the process. And what they both state in the letter that's in the record, North Plains and Banks did not want to be surrounded by nothing but 50-year long protected land. And so land was set up, the land that we're looking at for urban growth boundary expansion was directly set aside and not given long-term protection from urbanization, despite soil quality and other things, by the process and by the legislation. So that letter has been entered into the record, and that's their point of view on and recollection on a bunch of different points that we've talked about here. Thank you. So on the next, this just kind of previews the map. So here's the map of that results from the grand bargain legislation. Okay, and the area I think where actually I think I have a pointer here. So I'm pointing North Plains right here. As was shown in a map earlier, the study area that we considered for the urban growth boundary expansion, it's white on the map. That's land that the grand bargain legislation of 2014 set aside for North Plains as undesignated so that it could legally consider future urbanization in those areas. Okay. Banks is in the same situation. They have a buffer of undesignated land around it, and they are just beginning the process of considering urban growth boundary expansion. Very early in the process is my understanding. All of this other land that's green colored, okay, that is rural reserves. That's where urbanization cannot happen for almost 50 years now, but in 2014, that was a 50-year time period given to it. So all of this where farming is occurring, where there is forestry going on, all of that is rural reserves. But this right here is where North Plains legally gets to look and urbanize and plan its future. And that's the area that is in the UGB expansion proposal before you all this evening. This is just a quote from some of the narrative from Metro, and we just want to be clear that when the grand bargain happened, it was basically a compromise of a bunch of parties in some rooms over the course of a weekend, quite literally. A few cities, Metro, and then some opponents to the reserves plan up until 2011. They were all in the room, so opponents and proponents of the map at the time. And opponents, including Thousand Friends, were in the room, and they all agreed to the compromise map that ultimately became the grand bargain legislative map you just saw. Okay. So we're living in a world and we're planning in an area where both proponents and opponents of prior reserves planning compromised on where growth could happen, including around North Plains. And that's what we're planning with now. And that's the law of the state of Oregon now. So anyway, just including bullet points, and I don't need to go through all of it, but North Plains was given under 1,600 acres of undesignated lands around it that's available to be able to plan as undesignated lands for future urbanization. That was made possible by the grand bargain. And everything else beyond that is rural reserves that can't be touched for urbanization. So North Plains is working with the relatively small amount around it for urbanization planning. And that's basically just what undergirds the UGB expansion area and process that we've gone through and what you're hearing tonight.
Okay, so as you can see here, we believe staff believes that the proposed expansion complies with the goals, administrative rules, and city code requirements, undergirded by an economic opportunities analysis and an H&A approved earlier in the findings in the staff report. So the Planning Commission and the staff both recommend the City Council approve Ordinance 490. And the next steps after this would be we would work with the Washington County, their Board of Commissioners and their Planning Commission to set up future hearings beginning hopefully later in September to do some work sessions with them. And then it goes on to DLCD for state acknowledgement. Okay, that concludes the presentation from staff.
Okay. Thank you very much. I know that was a lot to digest and take in, but I'm sure that many of us in the room have seen, heard, and lived through some of the events discussed in the staff report. So at this time, we're going to invite the public up. First, we will hear from the proponents, and I will call you two at a time so that you can prepare yourself to be next in line. And forgive me if I mispronounce your name. The first one up for the proponent would be, is it Robert Niehaus? Hi, welcome.
Good evening. Thank you for having me. My name is Bob Niehaus, and my address is on the card that I submitted when I walked in. I was born here, raised here, and I've been a commercial real estate broker for 42 years, all right here in the metro area. I represent a company called Pacific Coast Fruit Company. I'm a real estate broker. Pacific Coast is operated by a family of third-generation farmers. They own and they occupy about 150,000 square feet for food processing and distribution in the central east side of downtown Portland. They need twice that floor area, plus excess land for growth. We've been looking for 20-acre industrial sites throughout the metro area for 3 years. We can't find a large site that fits their agricultural heritage or their roots, that's flat, that's clean, and has immediate access to a major freeway, all like you can find in North Plains. Flip side, Ron Wyden, Tina Kotek, and Maria Pope commissioned a semiconductor subcommittee to identify 25 acres or more that are available now for development in the metro area. They found 3 properties ready for immediate industrial development totaling 86 acres. We need more developable land. It's obvious. It's good for North Plains, it's good for Metro, and it's good for Oregon. I congratulate the city of North Plains for the thoughtful process to create a commodity that is much needed and can offer food and agriculture users an opportunity to build and grow within our community in addition to the tech sector. I'm excited for the future of North Plains. Thank you.
Thank you. Dawn Weber and then Deborah Van Raden Davis. I don't see Dawn. Yeah, I think that's on. Okay, so after Deborah Van Raden Davis, Scott Van Raden.
Hello, everyone. My name is Deborah Van Raden Davis. I'm a proponent of adopting the UGB. I've already stated why, and I'm just really grateful for the thoughtful consideration and all the work you put into it. I'm tired, I'm sure you're tired, and I'm ready to go home.
Thank you, Deborah.
I am Scott Van Raden. I live in Banks. My address is on the card. I appreciate all that you guys have done. 8 years is a long time to wait for a thing like this. As I stated last month, I just appreciate being able to get to a grocery store in a reasonable period of time without having to drive hither and yon. It's a simple thing. It seems like you ought to be able to do it. It just takes me 30 minutes and all the gas and all of the time. And my kids are doing that. They all live in Hillsborough. They're back and forth at my house, and it would be really nice to have that one simple thing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next would be Eric Lawson and Charlie Hopewell.
Good evening, council members. My name is Eric Lawson, 32410 Northwest Wasco Street. I am the current chair of the Economic Development Committee. I was the Economic Development Committee representative for the Project Advisory Committee for the UGB expansion process. I've represented the EDC at multiple public hearings and written and read off pretty similar testimonies throughout each, so I'll keep it pretty concise for the sake of brevity. Essentially, the EDC and myself have taken up the issue with the UGB expansion process since the PAC inception and many years prior to. We as a committee recommend the council approve ordinance 490 as presented this evening for the following reasons. We as a committee feel the UGB expansion would help ensure the reversal of the bedroom community trend in North Plains. It would drive economic development and balance through the work being completed concurrently with revitalization. And it would provide sufficient land for industrial growth that would divert traffic to Highway 26 Durham exit and hopefully divert traffic going through the center of town. We commend the city staff, consultants, and council members for your time. I know it's been quite a long journey, but the community thanks you for your dedication. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Charlie Hopewell. I'm a previous CEO and current board chair of Jewett Cameron Companies, just down the road on Hillcrest. I'm here as a proponent of the UGB and also as a member of the Project Advisory Committee. I think more than anything, I'd like to mirror Eric's comments, particularly to the crowd in opposition in regard to the process that's taking place, plus the discussion that we had dealing both with the HHA as well as the urban growth boundary. There were significant conversations that went on in regard to the densities that we were looking at, how you balance that with the need of the community, which I heard tonight of wanting to have single family homes primarily for the culture of the city and to maintain that. And we compliment, everybody's patience in regard to that. I didn't see, and we didn't see necessarily a great deal of public comment while we were having that process, which I think was about 2.5 or 3 years of continuous conversations going back and forth. And although I appreciate people's comments now and so forth, I really feel as though the research has been done thoroughly, in my estimation, of both running a business as well as being a member of the community. Again, I commend the councils and the staff for actually taking the time to be careful in their steps, and particularly in public awareness. I'm not sure how you do it anymore, because are there newspapers anymore? But the long and short is, and I provided testimony to the planning commission as well. Jewett Cameron, we've operated in North Plains, want to continue to operate in North Plains. We apologize for the many trucks that go down our primary commercial street on a daily basis, but we're also glad to bring economic activity. And quite frankly, we would like a community where our employees would feel that they can not only call their business home, but their home as well. And I feel as though we're on the right track. I commend you for looking forward to try to figure out how you grow well. And we should underline grow well. And the comprehensive planning that will follow this, I think will do exactly that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Tony Van Raden and Kimball Ferris.
I'm Roy Van Raden, my address is on the card. My maternal grandparents moved to North Plains in 1956. And for the rest of my family, we've loved this city ever since. I'm a proponent of the UGB expansion and followed this effort for these many years, and I believe it's been extremely well conducted. And I believe that it is necessary for the survival of the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Kimball Ferris, my address is on the card. I want to speak in favor tonight of this process with just some philosophical comments, and I make those with some experience. I'm a practicing attorney now, but I have degrees in landscape architecture and regional planning, served on the Washington County Planning Commission as its chair a long time ago, back in 1980 to 84, when we went through a very similar difficult process of acknowledging Washington County's comprehensive plan with LCDC. There was a lot of opposition, there was a lot of testimony, but the planning process was comprehensive. And I had not really intended to say anything tonight, but as I listened to the staff report and the careful steps and stages that you've gone through here in North Plains, I just want to extend a compliment to you. I think you've done an excellent job, a careful job. Of course, there'll be opposition. The process of change is difficult, but the Greek philosopher Heraclitus indicated that the only thing that's constant is change itself. We have to change. We have to plan for growth. It's hard. It's difficult. It's careful, needs to be careful and comprehensive. I think that's what you've been doing. So good luck as you go forward, and undoubtedly it'll get tested, but I think the care and the spent is worth it. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next up, Rudy Kadlab and Joanne Vanderzee.
Joanne, I'm Rudy Kadlab.
Use the mic, Rudy.
Madam Mayor, council members, I'm Rudy Kadlab, address on file, You've heard from me before. I've been around here for the last 20-some years working with the city and the last urban growth boundary expansion that resulted in Brent Hill and Sunset Ridge. Here we are some 20-some years later. I have been involved in the housing industry for over 40 years as a master planner and home builder in Oregon, Idaho, and Washington. And I share that only to give credence to my commendation to your staff, your consultants, to the Planning Commission and the Council for the due diligence that they have put forth over the last several years. Furthermore, they've included DLCD, ODOT, County, and Portland State, all who have been consulted during this UGB expansion process. The result of this engagement of all of these folks is a recommendation of the Planning Commission that you have before you tonight. I represent here in North Plains a multi-generational North Plains landowner and farming family, and they and I are proponents of this recommendation of 490 and urge that you adopt it tonight.
Joanne Vanderzee.
My name is Joanne Vanderzee. 8515 Northwest Jackson School Road is not my mailing address, but that's the property I own on the east side of North Plains. It's probably going to be brought in. And I am a total proponent. I would like to retire. Good job. Thank you all so very, very much.
Thank you. I'm just gonna call it Don Weber. If you- Any other folks in the audience who wish to speak as a proponent? Okay. We'll move on now to the opponents, and I'll call you up two at a time. Dean Moberg and Dave Vanash.
Good evening. Fun. My name's Dave Van Ash, and you've got my address in a letter that you all have from me. Basically here just to let you know who I am. Our farm is over on Melanie Road, part of it. But we farm a couple thousand acres. We're a large family farm in the area. And everything I've heard here today was, it's all positive about the city of North Plains. But I haven't heard anything about the negatives that are going to take place here on the agricultural community. It's like you just totally ignored it. I was on the Urban Rural Reserve coordinating committee, the planning of the Urban Rural Reserves. I was one of the plaintiffs that filed the lawsuit with the Oregon Court of Appeals. We won. We did have this settlement in downtown Hillsborough. And as I recall, to the best of my knowledge, that was 2014, this land was undesignated here in Banks because you weren't part of Metro. And yes, you wanted to expand, but the farming community wanted to keep this land as agriculture, including all the rest of the urban rural reserves. So I have a large conflict with the two letters you got from Andy Dyke and Tom Bryant. That's their opinion. You're hearing briefly what mine is. And they totally differ from each other. As I said, we have a family farm. We've been around for 127 years. We have a succession plan, and we intend to be around another 127 years or more. And what you're doing here is going to directly affect my farm
and all the other farms in Northwest Washington, Oregon. As you'll see in my letter, all the ag infrastructure for this county and the surrounding counties, North Yamhill, Tillamook, Clatsop, Columbia, Sophie's Island area, Multnomah, and Southwest Washington are all depending on the tractor dealerships, the machine shops, the seed cleaners, all the other ag infrastructure. Those places are too small to support their own. So they all come here to take care of that. Butch Kendall, you should know that. You work in the seed cleaning business. Anyway, I feel personally, and I've been involved in land use, used to work for the city of Hillsborough as a civil engineer and retired from that in 1980 and started farming. Our farm personally is being squeezed by Hillsborough, Cornelius, Forest Grove, and now this town. And where are we supposed to go? You're talking about expanding. All these farmers over here want to expand too. There isn't any more land to expand to. So, St. Paul, Oregon, I'll give you one example. They downsized their UGB about 10 or 15 years ago because they didn't want to expand. So I'm sure you have that choice. And I watched the city of Cornelius when I was a teenager go from 600 to 12 or 15,000, whatever it is now. And I've testified at a lot of their hearings on expansion, and they sound just like yours. We got to expand or we're going to die. We need more industrial land. We need more residential land. So then we go through this 5-year, or in this case, 20-year cycle, and then it just repeats itself. We need more land again. There isn't any more land. Thank you.
My name is Dean Mulberry. I live in unincorporated Washington County, excuse me, and my address is on the file. I've been involved in agriculture for almost 50 years, West Coast and the Midwest, in the state of New York. For over 25 years, I've been involved in agriculture in Washington. I have a PhD. My dissertation was in the mineralization of Oregon in the soils of Western Oregon, and I'm a co-author of the book Soils of Oregon, which is available in Washington County Public Library System. Interest coming because something to read. You know from previous testimony and from the UGB expansion report, I think it's figures 5 and 6, that the proposed expansion is on to mainly prime farming soils that are used to go into that and for the utility are all very aware of that already. Also in the UGB expansion report, it's pages 15, 51, and 52 talk about the impact, the agricultural impact of the proposed expansion. And that provides I think, a decent broad overview of agriculture, but there's a lot of details like Peter Van was talking about. There's a couple more. One is as the city expands as proposed, especially with the industrial commercial expansion, the rural roads are going to get more and more congested, and farmers like Dave trying to pull large, low, wide, sometimes dangerous equipment on the road, they're going to have a hard time getting from one field to another. Maybe more importantly, something that the report doesn't address is that all of the farms around here have subsurface drains. You probably think of it, heard of it as tile drains. And those drains often go from one farm to another. It's kind of a cool, communally maintained system of drains that allows farmers to farm their land. And I know from personal experience that if you disrupt one of those drains, you're not just affecting that farm, but you're also have a great potential to affect the ability of the farmer uphill and the farmer down to the farm. That was not addressed in the report. In a previous meeting, I can't remember if it was a city council meeting or the planning commission meeting, I heard one of the people say that their hands are tied. And I would humbly suggest that your hands are not tied. The decision of whether to agree with this proposed expansion is in your hands, which is where it should be in a democracy, not in the hands of your staff, and very capable staff, or in the hands of consultants, or in the hands of the people behind you. It's in your hands, and your hands are not tied. If you really think that this proposed expansion balances your desire to keep that small town North Plains feel with your legitimate desire to grow in a reasonable manner, with the legitimate desire of farmers like David and Ash to continue farming and producing food and fiber for the world, then obviously you should vote in favor of it. If you don't, obviously you should vote against it. If you're not sure, I would submit humbly as a elected volunteer official myself that you can abstain from voting. I do that sometimes in my role on the 12 National Conservation Board. I hope that before you vote that we hear your thoughts on this and why you think that this is a reasonable balanced expansion, or why you don't. Before you vote, I'd really like to hear your thoughts after hearing all the thoughts of the staff and proponents and opponents. Thank you again for the ability to testify, and I mean this sincerely, thank you for your voluntary service to the city of North Plains and the people.
Next up, we have Nellie McAdams and David Sanforo.
Mayor Linehan, city councilors, I'm Nellie McAdams, my address is on the record. I'm testifying as a private person in opposition to the UGB expansion. First, the process was flawed. The city's first vote was invalid because of failure to provide notice. In renoticing these meetings, the city repeatedly and incorrectly stated that the UGB decision was already adopted and people could only comment on the amendments. The city also incorrectly stated that this expansion is required by Oregon law, when that is false. Cities are required to review their 20-year land supply. They are not required to expand their UGBs, and the extent and location of that expansion is subject to public comment. Just tonight, a presenter said with finality and without supporting evidence that goal 14 factors were addressed, implying that it's not worth arguing otherwise. But that is not a statement of fact, it is a question for public comment. City residents rejected expansion by ballot measure every time but once. Now the city is proposing the largest expansion in history, but it failed to provide meaningful notice, meaning many stakeholders, except those who stand to gain tens of millions of dollars from the sale of their land, do not know this process or to assume it's inevitable. Second, the city has not demonstrated the need for this much land. The PSU population study was flawed, and that it assumed that the very recent and unusual annexation that doubled the city's population was status quo, despite the city's location outside the metro. The EOA was also flawed in that it claimed a need for commercial and industrial land based on target industries that were speculative and also inside metro. Regardless of these flawed studies, the city, according to LUBA, is not required to amend its UGB to provide appropriate land to accommodate every new industrial land marketing technique enjoying success in other major urban real estate markets. Just because land is undesignated does not mean the city has a right to take it without a demonstrated need. That need has not been proven. Regardless of SB4's relevance to this UGB expansion, the city's EOA relies heavily on that bill's semiconductor task force report, which claimed to not identify enough industrial parcels inside UGBs for semiconductor fabs. But there is no statewide inventory of industrial lands, and after the report came out, cities identified 10,000 acres of industrial land inside their UGBs. Moreover, none of the 16 applications for CHIP for state funding are requesting land inside or outside of UGB. Because there's an oversupply and a lack of demand for industrial land, semiconductor fabs do not need any land in North Plains, especially to the west where there is no infrastructure for this water and energy demanding industry. In short, the 2022 EOA's assumptions were wrong and it should be revised. The city claims that high tech will save it from the budgetary hole that low density residential development got it into. But Hillsborough forgoes almost $100 million in school district funding a year in tax breaks to the industries North Plains wants to attract. With neighboring cities waiving taxes and sacrificing public services to attract income, why would tech businesses move to a city that wants to use them to raise tax revenue?
More importantly, the desire to increase tax revenue is not a need factor under Goal 14. If the city wishes to address its tax base, it could raise its property taxes, which it admits are among the lowest in the county. I would also like to add my H&A testimony to the record under the lack of need for housing land and the ability to accommodate those lands within the UGB. For these reasons and more, I urge you to please vote no and to reconsider this expansion. Thank you.
Dear Mayor and North Plains City Councilors, for the record, my name is David Santoro. I reside on Harrington Road in Roy. I am a fourth generation farmer. Our family farm is located in southern Washington County. My family has seen a lot of changes in the past 115 years. It has made a lot of changes in the past 115 years, but I oppose the North Plains UGB expansion for a number of reasons. Oregon's world-class soils are finite. As previously stated, there's talk of new houses and new factories, but no new farmland available for rent or purchase. My 89-year-old dad and I have raised many crops over the years and currently raise grass, hay, and hazelnuts. In addition to the custom farming we do, about 20 acres are contracted, but they're 15 miles away from where we live. Each sprawl results in less farmland available and it being more competitive and expensive to be able to rent or purchase farmland or housing in the EFU agricultural zones. Our family is going through so much turmoil and devastating hardship due to the many consequences of the South Hillsborough expansion. During the process, we were talked to and talked at. Our questions were not directly answered, and we were brushed off the whole time as insignificant stakeholders because we were outside of the South Hillsborough expansion by 20 feet. North Plains, please do better than Hillsborough and take time to include more stakeholders, listening to and valuing their input versus implying it is all a done deal. Our family asked at the South Hillsborough expansion meetings where all the traffic was going to go to and will it still be safe to move equipment on these roads. We were told that the traffic would only go north, and there would be no traffic impacts to the south on the two-lane country roads. Construction is still taking place. Our family contends with and struggles with the dangerous increased traffic, increased wear on the roads without efficient maintenance, increased trespassing and turnarounds on the private property, as well as collapsed wells during the pipeline construction and all the other things that no one brought up until a little too late. Two additional close to home tech industry consequences are that the Loa Intel campus literally changes the weather. It randomly snows for several blocks from the campus as an isolated weather system, proving that tech fabs have a devastating environmental footprint. Why would North Plains want tech industry on Oregon's world-class soils? The second impact is that when my family in South Hillsborough was going to buy appliances at the local Home Depot, they were asked what their address was. And the clerk instantly started selling them the additional extended warranty because the standard warranty does not cover the voltage spikes that kill the modern appliances. The spikes are Intel related and they are 600 to 700 times more likely within his address area of South Hillsborough. Oregon's world-class soils are finite. Once you tear off the life-supporting topsoil and send it to the landfill, you do not get it back. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next up is David Fungus. And Elena Wilder.
Well, my name is David Hunt. And I have address on the card. We, our family, opposes the urban village boundary. And I'd like to tell you our story. Our family had a farm in Beaverton, and my dad farmed there for 50-some years, which used to be our neighbor, the Steve Mill, before they moved to North Plains. But we farmed there until we had houses on 3 sides of our farm. And it got to be the point that it was just not equitable to try to farm because we had so many complaints about noise and dust and spraying and that kind of thing. And so I see this coming out here now. We moved out to North Plains here 30 years ago, and we thought, oh, we're out in the country, but that looks like the city's coming to us again. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Glenna Wilder, and you have my address on the card. I have lived in Washington County for 47 years, and of that 39 years farming in Mountaindale. We raise heritage sheep and hay. I am stunned to have learned that North Plains has proposed a semiconductor factory to be built on Mountaindale Road. I have studied maps of the proposed expansion area and ownership of the affected land, and it is clear to me that this plan will enrich the pockets of a handful of landowners. As we have seen on Brookwood Parkway, once development begins, it metastasizes and spreads like cancer. First one, then two, then 4 farms, then 10 farms fall. The bigger it gets, the more powerful it gets, and soon farmers in the adjacent areas have no voice. We've seen Hawthorne Farm Intel, and then Jones Farm Intel. Are we going to see Crop Farm Intel? North Plains is also not concerned about the devastating impacts to wildlife. Mountaindale has a resident herd of up to 75 Roosevelt elk. The proposed site for a semiconductor factory is exactly, I checked this with my odometer, is exactly 1 mile from the fields where these magnificent elk congregate to graze and raise their young. Industrial development will move these elk out. There's a lot of research that has found that to be true. Mountaindale also sits in a migration path for tundra swans who rest in seasonal wetlands in Mountaindale. Less than a half mile from the proposed semiconductor site. Industrial development will interfere with their migration and increase mortality. And again, I have scientific evidence to back this up. I also happen to be married to a habitat and wildlife biologist. North Plains is also proposing large swaths of housing development on some of the finest farmland soils in the United States. This will serve Portlanders who are looking to escape the high cost of living and violence. I went to the post office yesterday and admired the new scenic mural that is being painted on the side of the mill. How ironic it is. The mural depicts a herd of elk, the very elk that will be pushed out, and they will be just a memory. Perhaps the mural should be repainted and depict microchips instead of elk, since North Plains City government wants their town to be known as a semiconductor manufacturing center. This isn't about need. This is about greed. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Gail Taylor and Barbara Ann Stadelman.
Good evening, my name is Gail Taylor.
Thank you.
My name is Gail Taylor, and my address is on the card. However, I do live in close proximity to the proposed industrial part of the west expansion of North Plains. And first of all, a comment that's very interesting about the tile. We disrupted a tile in our pasture, which is above this whole area last year and or the year before, and the whole property area below that did flood, and it was just one tile or one small segment of tile. So I can't quite imagine what might happen when we start dealing with that issue just to everyone. So, but anyway, progress, yes, there is progress, and I think that there needs to be some reconsideration. North Plains is a bedroom community, and first of all, I don't really understand what the problem is with that. People, some people do live and work in North Plains, but other people do commute a distance and come back home to a peaceful environment that they have chosen to live in and to love.
doesn't mean they always necessarily have to work where they live. And it seems nonsensical to think that creating a manufacturing plant or semiconductor factory or any industry will help the employment of the people of North Plains. It seems to me that most people who work there, because it's a lot of people, will come to North Plains from outside of our community and will drive to work, home again, without a second thought about North Plains. The traffic alone is already becoming a nightmare on 26. Hard to imagine more traffic coming on 26. So I would assume that all of this industrial area has, there'll be consideration of all the infrastructure, and I can't even imagine, given it's going to look like someone said, like Jones Farm, Brookwood, or whatever, because it takes a lot of infrastructure to handle many shifts. You know, I think they run all night, so there's 4 shifts a day of traffic. The interesting thing about that is I live in a place where I can see the 26 traffic. And this last weekend, because of the Memorial holiday, the traffic was back at going to the beach, clear up to Cornelius Pass, I heard. And this was like 10 miles an hour to the beach. So it's interesting to me to think that if people are coming to go to work and getting off at Dersham Road and they can't get there, then what are they going to do? They're going to take an alternate route. And instead of, like one person said, that directs the traffic onto 26, it seems to me that if people can't travel on 26 for one reason or another and they need to get to work on time, they're going to come through North Plains, West Union, and down Commercial Street to get to this little area that's blocked from any other direction. So it's going to make people traveling through North Plains more apparent and not less, unless there's a lot of infrastructure changes to accommodate industry. I don't know. I mean, there is also, in my mind, it seems that there is like a lot of industrial area that can be acquired other places, although some people have said not. So I don't really understand that. It seems to be a lot of industrial area that is waiting to be purchased or used in the Hillsborough area. And it seems to me also that North Plains is North Plains, and to try and make it something that it's not, what, you know, why can't it be the bedroom community? Why can't it be the farming community? Just let it ease into what it really wants to be, because I think that's what it wants to be. And yes.
Thank you.
Mayor and staff, thank you for letting me speak. My name is Barbara Stallman. I live on Old Pumpkin Ridge Road, just off of Mountaindale Road. We have lived and been born and raised in this area for many years. I dreadfully hate to see farmland go to industrial and homes. I can't stand what's happening on North Avenue. That just is terrible. I don't mind infrastructure within city limits. That's responsible and called for. But when you start taking farmland to make housing, just because somebody says we need more housing, and that housing is not anywhere near where people work. I wish the people who travel the highway lived where they work, rather than living who knows where, because every time you travel Glencoe Road to try to get to Forest Grove and vice versa in the evening, you can't even hardly get on the road. That and to see farmland being developed into something that is not pretty, that can hurt our health and wildlife, that can hurt all of us, is not called for. It needs to be considered. It needs to be continue as it is in ways that actually help us to continue living as we are. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next up is Axa Vin and Ryan Miller. Yes, it's you.
Okay, it's me and, my name is Ryan Miller and I live on Dairy Creek Road in North Plains. That's all on the card that I filled out, so you got the access full address there. When I purchased land in North Plains over 3 years ago, I was really heavily influenced by the current road boundary and the fact that the land that I purchased was in the exclusion area. I was really shocked when I learned about the current plan and how far along everything was in June. And I learned that from my fellow citizens Facebook post. I was really shocked to see how far along it was, and mainly because I didn't receive any outreach from the city of North Plains itself. The outreach that was done was the bare minimum, and I learned that there are many landowners who were supposed to be notified and they were not. You guys already mentioned that, and that's why we are currently here to be here now. And I'm actually thankful for that because that gives me actually a chance to talk about this, because otherwise I wouldn't, and I missed the first one. But this poor communication effort is a recurring theme that I've seen throughout this process, and it's one of the reasons why many of the citizens of North Plains are uninformed. As I dug further, I realized that many of the citizens of North Plains do not want to expand in this manner. I learned that in the past they voted against this expansion, and when that issue was brought to a vote. Now we are not going to a vote. It has to be done through a council meeting. So I'm relying on all of you to make this choice for me, because I cannot vote. My hands are tied. In my opinion, this is aggressive expansion, and by aggressive, I mean that there is low density housing that's going to sprawl unnecessarily. It's going to put an exorbitant amount of industrial land that we do not need, and it's my opinion that the information that we're going on is biased. In my opinion, this is becoming more about money and not about the land. I know that there are a lot of people on this board that are involved in real estate or know someone in real estate, and they might also be a landowner in this area. It makes no sense to me why we're not looking on the other side of the Highway 26 and we're really looking at the one side that we are. It just really points in a bad direction that I don't like. I know that many of you are very good people, and I really hope that you can make the right choice for the people of North Plains. In conclusion, I ask the city to revisit this decision and take that to the table and reduce the amount of land that you guys are trying to take, and to use the amount of land that we have currently appropriately. I work for a semiconductor fabrication plant, and they are very bad for the environment. They use a lot of energy, and it's something I do not want to see in North Plains. I'd like to see North Plains continue to be a small town. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Jackie Dyke Jones and Katie Miller.
Good evening, Jackie Dyke Jones. Address has been submitted. Thank you, Mayor Linehan and council members. Thank you for everyone for your eye contact and being engaged with the testimonies tonight. I've engaged with many of you, whether it's at a restaurant, as an owner, recycling, etc., or Jewett Cameron. And I need you to feel our passion that this is serious, right? So I'm a fourth generation farmer, steward of the land, raised on Mountain Dell Road, and farm literally one field over from the west sub area. This is not a toy and it's not Legos. So I'm telling you now that the land I farm will never be for sale. No matter how much the money, you could try me. I'm strongly opposed to the UGB proposal as is, and I urge your reconsideration to work on a proposal that has a truly socially and environmentally conscious focus that will not destroy the local agriculture, economy, and infrastructures. So I think it's interesting that I was actually planning on talking about the 2035 vision, because I strongly believe that doubling in size and destroying the hundreds of acres of world-class soils won't get the city any closer. So as far as community, I knew about this in 2020 at the very end when this proposal was starting. And when I talked with mayor and other committee members in the city, it was not even a conversation. It was like, this is what we're working on. What's the point of being engaged? And that's pretty much where it keeps feeling like. So the last planning commission meeting was terrible. No wonder you haven't had as much engagement here in North Plains. And then when the economic development committee chair testified about, then all the traffic could be on Mountain Dell Road. So we haven't been able to hear any of the concept mapping yet. North Plains is getting this grant yet. So all these things are happening, but this committee chair is saying, oh yeah, but all along, I've been asking for the agriculture economic study and compatibility to be shared so that you're actually voting on what North Plains is giving up for the housing and industry and commercial, quote, PSU tax revenue needs. Connectivity, someone just mentioned grocery store a bit ago. So that's going in the North Plains UGB. So mute point. That's coming. So that's not a reason for the UGB. And then on the website, Heritage and Natural Resources. This kills me. Agriculture heritage is visible and accessible in places like Lakeview Farms. City policies preserve natural assets like the creek and tributaries. But really, if we pave over it all, there is going to be none. Again, the vision statement of public services, I see online over and over what is not being done. And every time I listen to a meeting, public services is not being funded, they're understaffed, and they need help. I would love to see North Plains show us what the survey shows, the online one, what you love about North Plains. I can't wait to see those results. And I also can't wait to hear when I'm listening to a meeting that public services is reporting that things are going great. So I get I get paid nothing to participate in these conversations. I have nothing to personally gain financially or otherwise. And I still don't feel that this is a two-way street. Please stop alluding that this is a done deal. It's abuse of power, it's misleading, and it's corruption. Use the time to do the right thing. I've asked over and over, if you have not been to the DLCD map viewer to actually see the soils, then just abstain or vote no or postpone. This land is finite. Of course, many landowners are willing to sell for millions of dollars, and they're in support. Shame on North Plains for even asking such an aggressive proposal. So if their land were actually for sale and you would drive by and see a sign, other farmers would buy it. There is no farmland for sale or lease. But guess what? There are farmers who would like to grow their agribusinesses, and there are young and beginning farmers who want to start one. 28% of the producers in Oregon are new and beginning. That means that's 10 years or less. There are 18,000 acres in the Metro UGB that's needing infrastructure money. North Plains doesn't need to be there.
Sorry.
Please be a steward of the land.
Sorry.
Okay, in my book, how did that get in my lunchbox? Happy first day of school.
Thank you.
I'll catch that next time. I'll catch that next time, folks. Sorry about that.
Hi again. My name is Katie Miller. I have a North Plains rural address that is on the card that I submitted. I take Durham Road exit regularly to get home. It's and I'm kind of appalled that the city wants to pave over it. It's such a beautiful piece of farmland. There's a glider field there, and I really hate to see that it turn into an industrial business complex. I think the UGB expansion plan has an excessive amount of industrial land that we don't need. And I don't think the city can quite handle the infrastructure support to double the size of the city. There is nothing wrong with being a bedroom community. One thing that has changed since you started this process is how the pandemic has changed industrial offices. I am a 100% remote worker. I work from home. Many offices in downtown Portland remain empty. It's a ghost town. They're trying to get workers back into the office. So if downtown Portland and other cities cannot fill commercial offices, why do we need this much industrial space? I'd also like to talk about the city's communication issues. In my written testimony, I documented 4 specific instances in which the city miscommunicated with me and the public at large in July and August. To summarize, the city repeatedly claimed testimony could only be given on the amendments for this meeting and the previous planning commission meeting, but not on the UGB as a whole. It was claimed that the UGB expansion was, quote, already adopted. This erroneous information was sent directly to me via email, but also posted by the city on Facebook, the city's news webpage, and in the August water bill, which was mailed out to all citizens in North Plains city limits who pay a water bill. Here is the exact language from the answer that was included. I included a photo in my written testimony that I submitted last week. So these 2 additional hearings will, quote, provide additional context to the already adopted UGB expansion report. This will not change the UGB approved area, end quote. This language is misleading. The citizens of North Plains never got a clear or correct information in July and August, and probably never understood that they had another opportunity to voice their concerns. In the past, residents have voted down almost every application to expand the city's UGB when annexation was done by a vote of all citizens. As we know, some amount of growth will indeed happen. But as a town, we don't want to become the next Tanasbourne or Hillsborough. We want to maintain the small town charm and values that several of you councilors wrote about in your bios on the city website. So who are the many people, some of the many people, a good chunk of the many people in support of the UGB expansion? Developers for sure, small business owners, real estate agents, basically people who are going to make a lot of money off of this. And of course, the city will also get increased tax revenue. So backroom deals between elected officials and landowners have also taken place. These landowners stand to make millions of dollars from their sale of land. They no longer have to work. And none of this sits right with me. Why is our town selling this out? Where is the moral code? As you are able to vote tonight, so can the voters vote in the next election. We really want officials who listen to the voice of the people, not the voice of developers. Included in my written testimony, I went through the Facebook pages. I know some people don't use Facebook. You know, I work in design and communication, and I have to manage Facebook pages, and my brain works that way. So I went through City of North Plains and North Plains community. There's hundreds and hundreds of comments of, we don't want to be the next Tanasbourne. Keep our town small. Please don't do this. Why won't the city listen to us? So please consider the voices of the people who aren't here tonight, the people who think that it's a waste of time to come here and testify. Anyway, councilors, please don't be afraid to stand up and question the powers that be. This expansion can be done differently with significantly less industrial area. I am particularly protective of the Northern Road exit. It is just amazingly beautiful. I prefer that that land be left out of the equation. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh. No, just, you stay for room. Thank you. Next up, Pat, Walter, and Larry Knight.
Good evening, thank you. My name is Pam, and I reside at 9555 Northwest 316 Place, Hillsborough. I'm testifying in opposition to the proposed 34-acre expansion south of Highway 26, currently zoned exception lands, identified in the report as sub-area B. My family and I have lived there since 1987. And while some of my neighbors might consider me a newcomer, I am not a newcomer to citizen involvement. I served for 15 years as secretary of CPOA and have been involved in previous city and county UGB expansion processes. Had I been notified of the city's plan amendments in a timely manner, I would not be sitting at this table. Goal 14 states that exception lands should be given first consideration for expansion. It does not require that said lands be brought into the boundary, contrary to what I was told at the previous hearing in July. According to a phone conversation I had with Kevin Young at DLCD 2 weeks ago, his role as a staff member was to provide guidance regarding long-term urbanization, but not to direct a decision. In other words, your hands were not tied to the inclusion of exception lands. You had the power to decide otherwise. Having said that, if the 38 acres where I live were included in order to minimize the acreage taken from EFU lands in the areas surrounding the current UGB, I would be more understanding. However, the city's study cited many factors that make sub-area B unsuitable for inclusion. Among them, high-value farmland currently in production, parcelization that limits development, significant costs to providing services and road improvements, and most obviously, lack of connectivity to the urban area created by Highway 26. Yet, despite these constraints and others, the study group and you have concluded that the city needs these 38 acres, none of which add to the livability of the city. That a small fraction of the area that faces Glencoe Road is hardly a persuasive argument. Had the aspirations of the city been driven by logic and reason, the expansion into sub-area B would not have been considered. All one must do is to look at the map to understand that it makes no sense to jump Highway 26 for the marginal tax benefits that this hamstrung area could provide. That was the conclusion in previous plan amendments, and it is still valid today. I urge you to reconsider expansion into sub-area B. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
Yeah, good evening. My name is Larry Dyke. I'm a farmer, live on Mountaindale Road. And at the last meeting that I attended of the council, one of the topics that came up was voter annexation. Voter annexation, and Mayor Linehan made the comment that the voter annexation was taken away by the state. And this is true, except for the fact that where did it come from? It came from a farmer who lives north of here who did,
and apparently several other developers or consultants that went to Salem, and the law was passed to take away the voter identification. But it did not start with Salem doing it. It came from North Plains. And I don't know, any of you were on the city council at that time, where was the city council involved either in support or against it? Does anyone know? What were you on at that time?
This body opposed that, Major.
Did they?
1543,
1573.
73.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you. Okay, so now you said we can't do anything. Well, you can still do a poll. Can't you still take a vote of the citizens? I mean, tonight, President Sheldon, you said at the last meeting, you guys don't count. You don't live in our city. Well, do you see anybody here tonight that lives in the city?
Not many.
Not many, exactly. So how are you going to contact them? How are you going to find out what your citizens want? Ask your staff? I don't think that's a good idea. You have to come up with some other approach. Can you send out a survey? Can you take a vote? Put it on the ballot. It doesn't have to be binding, but you could put out something and find out what the people of North Plains want. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Dale Pike and Aaron Nichols. Did I say your last? How did you pronounce your last name? Thank you.
I'm Dale. Okay. Feedback. I'm Dale Peak from Forest Grove. My exact address in my card. Mayor Lehan and Council President Sheldon and councilors. I admire you. I admire you because you look at people, you listen, and you try to see what's going on in their heads and also resolve that with your head. So I'm impressed with what's going on here in the way of pro and con. I prefer you have a pro and con like parliamentary procedure recommends. But it's okay to have all the pros, I guess, and all the opposition. It's not really recommended, but that's the way you're doing it today. But I really do appreciate your attention and how you're doing this. I am from Forest Grove. I've been a Washington County resident since 1966. I'm a former teacher who retired in 2000. And I'm involved in county public comment. I've been involved in sustainability chair of Forest Grove. So I'm really concerned about the environment, air, water, and land. Okay. And those are very important for not only you, but your kids and your grandkids. And I made public comment before the Environmental Quality Commission, which I'm going to do again shortly. I just made public comment before the county commissioners today. I'm going to share some of that with you. And I do want you, I was going to say, please give me a 30-second warning, right? So I don't get that, right? But so, and it is over to my right, so, you know, so just give me a little warning first before the bell goes off.
Fair, we'll try.
I did convince the mayor of Forest Grove to use the county system of keeping track of time. And so they actually incorporated that in their city. So I appreciate them. Everybody just can't see it. I sent a very short email to Mayor, and it said, at a public forum in Hillsborough, Senator Janine Solomon said it has been determined that plenty of land is within the urban growth boundary for the semiconductor expansion, and that more land does not need to be brought in. And she was the big person, I mean that literally, but she had a lot of the power in Salem in getting the Senate bill form passed. And she's the one that said, we do not need any more land for semiconductors. There's plenty already. And she is in the power structure to know that. But please listen to Senator Solomon's words. I did.
And I did that because it was a public forum, and Senator Solomon, Representative, McLean and Sosa did a public forum. And I was the first person to ask a question after they gave their comments, right? And so I asked two questions. One, what do you know about the Montana civil suit, the youth civil suit on climate change? One of them knew about it, the others did not. So they asked me to do a follow-up email and let them be informed about those two, that suit. The second thing had to do with Intel's application for increasing their pollution, this toxic air pollution, and they submitted to DEQ. And in that, I said, are you aware that the toxic air emissions that Intel currently is allowed to put in the airshed? And they said, no. Are you aware of what they're proposing to put in the airshed? They said, no. So I informed them this way, and I said, Intel's asking to increase the greenhouse, 52 seconds, from 819,000 tons to 1,700,000 tons per year, which means it equals to about three tons per minute that they will be allowed to put in the airshed for greenhouse gas. And then also, I don't have time to go through all the detail. What I did for the county commissioners today, I gave them this from DEQ that lists all of the PM, they currently can put 41 tons of small particulate matter in the air, and they want 67 tons. They can put currently 39 tons of sulfur dioxide, they want 39 tons. But nitrogen oxide, 197, they want 402 tons per year. We are talking about major toxic problem. And if you have semiconductor industries coming in, we've got problems. So I would encourage you to that.
That was softer than I think.
Good evening, Commissioner Mayor. Can you hear me? Not very good. My name is Aaron Nichols. I farm just over on Jackson Quarry Road at 10850 Northwest Jackson Quarry Road. I guess that makes me a distant neighbor of North Plains, but I can see North Plains from both where I work and where I live. I live next door to my farm. So I don't feel like a distant neighbor. I feel like I'm someone who is very much affected by what happens here in North Plains. Not I'm very fine. So I want to urge you again to just pause the passage of this expansion and allow for more input from affected parties like me, people in the city, from experts, a chance to engage in the process and give the discussion really important life and city changing and business changing demands. My previous testimony, I detailed the danger of farmland and farm communities, the lack of consideration of many statewide planning goals, the lack of expert testimony, and a clear lack of engagement with citizens inside and outside North Plains around this process. It seems to me that a political decision was made to grow the town, not on the merits of growth, but to enact it before North Plains becomes a part of that growth, or before Hillsborough gets the land first. I fear that the determination to see this plan enacted led to an end seeking rather than an evidence seeking of growth. Plans are written in essence marshal not on their own merits, but to support this kind of predetermined outcome. And worse, I think this approach led to kind of a disengaged process that lacked interest in public input and kind of feared expert testimony that might cast doubt on an overly ambitious and underly evidence expansion. I still think it likely this plan will fail to make it through the regulatory and political hurdles ahead of it due to the lack of substantive and believable evidence and its particular failures around the public process. Some of the testimony tonight convincingly, to me at least, argues that even should the plan go through, I don't think the city has the infrastructure ability to expand on a lot of the industrial and commercial lands, and certainly no one's shown the demand for the hundreds of acres in North Plains for non-agricultural job creating industries. But the legality and technical issues aren't the main issues before you tonight. The City Commission isn't before it, and you're not expected to parse the laws and planning here. We are expected to fairly represent the constituents and make the final overall decision to protect the town. As others mentioned in their testimony, it was clearly stated in state law, you are not required to expand the city. You are absolutely not required to expand the maximum of employment opportunity analysis. These are political decisions, and they should be made with an eye for making the most informed decisions on behalf of the city. While it's good to hear the opinion of the city staff and their concerns should not override the concerns of the affected citizens, and certainly shouldn't replace them with fact-finding and public engagement that brings a great UGB process. And while a Grand Bargain was made 10 years ago, they didn't have all the right answers then in their 2 days in the hotel room. And they didn't have the knowledge we have now about the disastrous loss of farmland in the last 10 years, that they didn't anticipate the many threats every legislative season to rural reserve lands that we have. They didn't know about the accelerating dangers of climate change 10 years ago that we know now. I don't think that, you know, the Andy Dyke of 10 years ago should make the decision for North Plains now. I think that's a chance for you guys to make the decision. I think that's what I'm trying to get. Should this decision go through tonight, it won't be carried by the fact, expert opinion, or a fair process. It'll be confirming a decision made for intra-city political reasons before the process even started. It'll shut out citizens of the city and those nearby who have legitimate concerns and could help make a better process, a better plan. I ask you to consider whether the facts have been fully collected and fairly presented to you. Whether you feel like the city listed Facebook posts and web pages like the public process looks like. If it engaged people who don't want to engage the process, if it reached out to people who aren't following the Facebook page. It is unlikely that any of us will ever again take part in the process that will drastically change the city. Is this the process that we want to set as an example? Is this a process we can defend not only to your constituents today, but to our children and our grandchildren as well as the result of our wistful and hasty thinking? I think not. I know we can do better, and I ask you to engage so we can all make a better process and a better plan for UGB. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you. Up next, I'm going to Fawn Rosie and Ken Hayes. Did I pronounce your name correctly?
Pretty close.
Okay.
My name is Fawn Hosey. My contact information has been submitted. My concerns today are for our sense of place and our future home. I live outside the city limits. North Plains has been my town for 30 years. It's where I see the vet and the auto mechanic. I stop at the bank and I grab good food from local purveyors. It's important to me that my town maintains its sensitivity, its charm, respect, and friendliness, values that the city would extend to residents and rural neighbors, farmers, and other business people, as well as wildlife, habitat, soils, and climate change issues, all critical to our survival. North Plains is fortunate to have important wildlife habitat. Have inventories been conducted and protection plans adopted? Likewise, prime farmland has its highest and best use. As soils in the farmland expansion area has been evaluated for an array of possible farming uses and considered for protection. Farming is a business. As our population grows, where will farmers grow? There's no more class prime farmland as we destroy it. A small footnote to the discussion of Washington County's 2014 UGB proposal. Actually, a proposal was earlier than that, but in 2014, January, I believe, the Court of Appeals threw it back to the county, remanded, because, as the court said, they had used pseudo factors in determining the soils for rural reserve. Those pseudo factors involved irrigation. It wasn't about the soils maps. So the soils maps do need to be looked at. And in that process, the process became a political one because of the economic impact. The end result wasn't based on soils, except for the lands that were part of the lawsuit. Anyway, has local planning addressed climate change? Vitally important. Yet this proposal would destroy farmland and drastically reduce carbon sequestration, while stalling development would significantly increase carbon emissions. 2 strikes against it. How would you mitigate that? I'm concerned that the UGB expansion seems room for unneeded low-tax industries and inappropriately high-cost housing, both sprawling across farmland with a byproduct of disrespect, insensitivity for the land, the environment, the hardworking neighbors in and around town. Equally worrisome, my town seems at risk of destroying its neighborly relationships, surrounding beauty, and our future prosperity. But growth doesn't require becoming larger. The St. Paul is one example of that. Growth can also come from slow and sensitive listening, learning, analyzing, maturing, getting taller, inspiring creativity. It's worth it to make careful decisions for future centuries, not just decades. Please protect farmland and the need for farmers to grow their businesses and protect my friendly small town. Thank you.
Ken Hayes. And I have a accept Ben and Don Weber. Is there anyone else in the room that would like to speak either for, be a proponent, opponent, or result?
I'd just like to, Brad Taylor.
Could you please come forward?
Yeah.
And make sure that you fill out a card before you leave.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Thank you.
I don't have a whole lot to say other than I was a realtor 35 years. I went into real estate when I was 19, graduate from Portsmouth High School. And I've seen property values go up and I've seen them go down in the economy cycle and cycle. I've seen areas that have been drastically affected by things that people thought would be beneficial to them. You come in here and you put a big industrial plant in like that, and you think, oh boy, we're going to have industry and all this growth. You know what? There's going to be a lot of people that don't want to live out here because that's not what they're after. And so you could have property values actually going down. The name of the town could be synonymous with pollution and all of this other, chaos that's going to ensue from it. That's why it needs to be considered sincerely and, make sure all alternatives are looked at because it's not like locked up that, oh man, we're going to grow, our property values are going to grow and taxes are going to grow. It could have an adverse effect. You need to consider that. I know that I wouldn't personally live here or move into this town if I were looking for property, if I didn't already live here and I saw that proposed or going in. Why would I want to live next to that smokestack? So just something I didn't hear anybody talk about, but it's not all growth is good growth. Thank you.
Okay.
Hey, Madam Mayor, City Council. My name is Sam Diaz, Executive Director for 1000 Friends of Oregon. In this job, a lot of people who may seem different than me in places that are different than where I live, but there's a lot of common elements, a lot of common ground that I find in this job. And it's visions like this that I hear tonight that truly unite Oregonians. It sounds like I want to live in a place where I can safely walk my kids to school and we'll run into their teacher on the way because they can afford to live in the same neighborhood. Whereas I work in a strong, diversified economy where businesses care about us. They don't threaten us. They don't hold us hostage. They support us through and through. We're dedicating a lot of oxygen about the acres and the location of these acres, but a strong urban growth boundary expansion process encourages us all to talk about the outcomes. The two focuses on those outcomes, one on housing and one on jobs. Do we need to expand our UGB to meet our current and future housing needs with this action? If we do need to expand, do we have the right suite of policies to meet the identified needs? Without enforceable affordability measures included, the city runs the risk of meeting its goal 10 housing obligations and potentially HUD's affirmatively furthering fair housing goals. Do we need to expand our urban growth boundary to create a diversified economy of the future? Well, first, we need to identify the types of jobs and lifestyles of the people who will take those jobs. It seems like tech is a basket people are putting a lot of eggs in, so I'll spend a little time. The current CHIPS and Science Act proposals across the state, from Corvallis to Hillsborough to Beaverton to the Rogue Valley, maximize existing tech campuses. The League of Cities, Oregon Business Council, and Oregon Economic Development Association conducted a survey earlier this spring, finding that there are approximately 10,000 acres inside existing urban growth boundaries zoned industrial. Any tech in North Plains will most likely look like a distribution center and a data center, with large parking lots, idling trucks, and a few jobs for local residents. Once the city demonstrates that there are other high-quality jobs to be created that supports the need to expand, we must ask, does the industrial land have a safeguard in place to avoid an all-too-common trap? Think of the airport, think of Jansen Beach, or an example much closer to here, the intersection of Brookwood and Huffman, also known as the Topgolf intersection. You see Topgolf, you see a strip mall with Verizon and Subway. That was all industrial land. The city didn't have a safeguard, an industrial sanctuary zoning, to really make sure that high quality jobs for the industrial sector would come in. My mom is a social worker. My dad was in law enforcement for over 20 years. I have great respect for everything you do for public service. My dad and his siblings worked in the orchards and the fields, and they instilled in me the importance of listening to the community and respecting the people who put food on our plates. So I thank everyone for coming here today. I thank you all for listening. There's a disturbing pattern for the budgets of our local governments. They're strained. In a year when we received news of the kicker being $5.6 billion, and local governments are strained to provide critical services, it seems like we need measures 5 and 50 reform. I've heard the importance of that reform from nearly every local elected official that we visited throughout the state. I hope we can work together on ways we can support local government. Expanding our urban growth boundaries while tempting, especially without safeguards for the residents or the city budget, is not going to solve the budget problem. It's going to add more to the expense column, not the one. Respectfully, I oppose this proposal. I oppose this proposal at this time. Thank you.
Any other person in the room wishing to speak? Can you tell if this is online? I don't know. And so you ran your raised hand feature. Okay, anyone else in the room? I'm going to turn this back over to staff for any final comments, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. This is Chris Green, the city attorney. There's just 3 things I wanted to touch on real briefly. I heard several people say the city's not required to expand the UGB. Strictly speaking, Goal 9 expressly requires the city to quote, provide for at least an adequate supply of sites of suitable sizes, types, locations, and service levels for a variety of industrial and commercial uses. Within the 20-year planning period. So where there is a need shown in the record for additional lands for a variety of industrial and commercial uses, the city has a legal obligation to provide that land. Goal 14 provides the same thing for housing. So you don't get to just decide to expand a UGB or not expand a UGB or contract a UGB because you want to or because you don't want to. There are laws that have to be followed. Goal 9 is the one for industrial and commercial lands that are addressed in the EOA, which is now an acknowledged part of your comprehensive plan. It is no longer subject to review, and it shows a need for additional land. And now the housing needs analysis, it shows a need for additional land. And the state planning laws do require you to address that and provide the necessary lands. It may be that St. Paul at some point shrank its UGB, presumably because it had a housing needs analysis or a economic opportunities analysis that showed they had excess land and could therefore contract it. But it has to be based on evidence in the record and the adopted policies in your comprehensive plan. You don't get to just make it up. With respect to the EOA, I heard a number of people challenge various conclusions in the economic opportunities analysis. Again, that was adopted last November. Those might have been useful arguments to hear back in November. That is now a final document and is no longer subject to review. And in fact, the city is required to rely on the adopted documents that are part of your comprehensive plan. So you simply can't ignore the conclusions in the economic opportunities analysis. And then the last thing I wanted to touch on was that I heard it from a couple of people that there have been 10,000 acres around the state identified as available for industrial uses. But if you read the Semiconductor Task Force report that is was the impetus, the catalyst for Senate Bill 4, it set out a list of criteria for sites that are more useful or more ideal, that you're going to look for to cite a fab plant or the constellation of industries that surround a fab plant. And these include things like proximity to a trained workforce. Not Medford and Redmond may have available industrial lands, but do they have a trained workforce? Access to international transportation facilities. This area is close to Portland International Airport, close to the Port of Portland, and close to multiple freeway interchanges. So you can get your product in and out more quickly. Housing, availability of housing, and so on. So not all acres, industrial acres, are the same, are created equal. There are things that make certain industrial sites more attractive, more useful than others. And that Semiconductor Task Force looked at the availability of industrial land around the state and concluded that there wasn't enough of the right kind of industrial land in the right places. So the fact that there might be 10,000 acres available around the state is probably something the governor is looking at right now, but it's not a relevant consideration for this UGB decision. Anybody else? Wait, micro. Yeah.
We got some specific comments tonight about opposition to expanding the UGB south of the freeway and to, I believe, sub-area 5B. And thank you for the comments. It wasn't an easy first choice process to look south of the freeway because that land is south of the freeway. It has its challenges and its issues. And the freeway long ago in a previous UGB expansion was a reason why expansion didn't occur south. But case law since, rules that have been changed since, the land south of the freeway is exception lands under Oregon land use law. And as exception lands, it is absolutely the first place the city has to look for UGB expansion before it looks at farmland. And the sub-area 5B, the one that was referenced, we couldn't eliminate it under state criteria from UGB expansion. We could aerate this. There are covenants in place with the properties and the airstrip The Air Acres residential development likely won't redevelop. It's not considered future 20-year capacity for growth for the city. So Air Acres residential area could be excluded. But the area that was brought up in comment tonight, unfortunately, couldn't be. Now, having said that, even though an urban growth boundary might expand south of the freeway to include that area, that doesn't force the property owner to annex and develop. Property owners don't have to annex into the city. They don't, even though they're in the UGB. They have that choice. This land just draws the outer boundary of where property owners have the choice to annex it. Okay. So I want to sympathize in part with, looking south of the freeway. It's not an easy thing, but we couldn't eliminate land south of the freeway, some of it. And so areas that were included, we heard opposition to tonight. Unfortunately, we couldn't exclude that area.
Any other comments from staff?
I just, one point, we have no planned semiconductor fab plant in the expansion areas. That's not anywhere in any report that we've produced. So I just want to make that clear and on the record.
And go ahead. I think the point that I would just remind from the presentation, I heard a lot about infrastructure and the cost of that and where things will happen. And so just a reminder that that's the next phase of the process. So right now we determine the line based on the need, based on some assumptions being made about how much land, housing and employment land will take. And then we go into that next concept planning phase funded by the state, where then we look at that and update all of our plans, our transportation plan, our water plan, and determine those types of things. So I agree with everyone who said we don't have the plans for the infrastructure, and we don't know where the roads are going to go and where exactly employment land and houses are going to be, because that's not this phase. So just a reminder of that.
Anyone else? Thanks, Steph. City Council, any questions for staff?
Wait a minute. Am I on?
You're good.
Listening to all the comments, this 800 acres, I know it's a big chunk. Could it be made smaller? Do we have to do 800 acres at once? Or do 100? Or I'm just asking the question. I know we went through all the process, but there's a lot of comments on you tonight. I'm asking that question.
I feel like I'm gonna go first. There might be more to add here. We talked about this as a team just today, and there's a lot of reasons to go for the full 800 acre stay, which includes giving the city some certainty with their planning process over the next 20 years. So if you say go for 100 acres right now, that may be your next 3 years, but you should be planning your next 3 years right now. You should be planning your next 5 years and 10 years if you're making infrastructure plans and transportation system plan updates and really giving some certainty to landowners and neighbors of how the city is going to grow. I think the first step was made with that when undesignated lands were left around the city, but now we're taking it to that next step and saying, for the next 20 years, we want to give certainty. This is what we want to do, and we want to invest in the planning and in the good decision-making that can bring the city where it needs to go. I would love to see your city not have to invest in another EOA and HA in the next 3 to 5 years. I'd love to see that last 10 years, but you have to put in the planning for the full process for that to be a reality. And so it's, to me, it's good planning to think through the next 20 years. In fact, when we started this process and we had some conversations with the PAC about the 40-year plan, is this whole undesignated land, is that North Plains 40 years? Maybe. We didn't go there because that's a little beyond what the planning process is, but it's not out of the realm. Yeah, my meeting before this was Scappoose 50-year plan. We need to be thinking as a community and as neighbors, where are we going? How long can we look into the future so that we can make valid decisions? And I think going for 5 years doesn't get you there when you're investing in infrastructure planning and how you're gonna grow.
Thank you. I have board for later.
Councilor Page.
What's to stop or slow down the speed of the developments? What do the UGB next step is to apply to become part of our place and pay a fee? What's to slow it down from having some of the farmers on the east side quickly sell out or become partners with the housing development like Lennar or some other one? And then we have a bunch of houses being rushed into the fray. And things like having a fence height isn't figured out yet. We have to spend a lot of energy on that. What kind of measures do we have to actually slow that process down before our small staff here is overwhelmed by some commercial developers?
Councilor Page, thank you for the question. I think the easiest answer to that is that the next step of this is the comprehensive plan process and figuring out the uses and the zoning and all of the policies and the infrastructure planning that we have to do. That's all the next step. And implementing all of that, proper policies and zoning and such, that's all in the next step. And then that has to be done before property owners can even consider annexation into the city to kind of begin the development process that you also mentioned. So we're looking at a multi-step process, and our comprehensive plan process that comes next is a gigantic part of getting at what I'm hearing are concerns about that.
So what I'm hearing is that there's a process involved, and there is no way to do it in the round of that process. Where we're up against the timeline, I'm sorry, you had 120 days to do this, and now it's too bad, so sad. Developers can do what they want. That's correct?
Councilor Page, that's correct. I mean, the first decision would be, first of all, the property owner has to decide whether they want to annex. And if you don't want to annex, you don't have to. But if they do want to annex, they have to apply for the city. And the city does not have to approve that application. Even if you do, the property will retain its county zoning until the city then, in a separate subsequent decision, rezones the property consistent with your comprehensive plan. So there are a series of steps that have to happen, many of which are within the city's control before any of their property would develop.
The ones that are out of control, are they time-based?
So the ones that are out of control are, and this is sorry to get into the weeds here, but that's where I live. ORS 227.178, 120-day rule applies to a decision for a permanent limited land use decision or zone change. Any other application, for example, an annexation application, is not subject to the 120-day rule. A comprehensive plan amendment, not subject to the 120-day rule. So until they come in with an actual development application, those timelines don't apply.
May I just add to that, Councilor Page? I just pulled up the annexation requirements for the city of North Bend from your development code. So in order to propose an annexation, a property has to be in the city's urban growth boundary, has to be contiguous to the existing city limits or separated by only a public right of way, stream, bay, lake, or other body of water. And a right of way that is not within the urban growth boundary may be annexed for road reconstruction or modification, which you've seen recently. But the criteria include that the proposed site complies with the city's comprehensive plan and the designations thereon, and that an adequate level of urban services is available. So that means that nobody can apply for annexation until the concept planning process is done, because that's where we'll designate comprehensive plan designations for those lands. And then you can't just decide the upper northwest corner is my land, so I'm coming in. There's probably not an adequate level of urban services. So it forces a logical implementation of development of land, and by nature slows. Can I guarantee you it'll take the full 20 years? No. But we do have the annexation criteria. We are going to use our concept planning to designate which lands go where. Like you said, will all residential come in before employment, I don't know, but those lands will be designated, and if the areas for residential don't have the urban services, they'll have to wait or put in the urban services.
Thank you.
Councilor Cleveland and then Councilor Smith.
For the sake of time, I will keep mine quick, but just staff, I know in some of our previous packets, we have reviewed soil quality, and I know that's part of the criteria as well for this finding. And just hearing from the testimony tonight, I just want to confirm or deny that those soil studies that were conducted and presented to us in a previous packet were DLCD approved soil studies. And this isn't, or is it an independent study by the city?
No, thank you for that question. The soils information that is in the UGB report does follow the state's process. The state doesn't have a clear process, so we asked for the process. We were given some guidelines. We followed that and got a general, yep, that works for us. The other thing to keep in mind is that these are high quality soils. The issue here is that these were designated lands as undesignated. These are undesignated lands, you know, in the grand bargain. And so that issue, I'm not saying that the soils were deeply looked at that point. I don't know. I wasn't part of that. But those areas are the only place we can look to expand. We don't have any option to look at less valuable soils. The city can only expand onto the areas that are undesignated, and they all happen to be, except maybe some of the exception lands, which we have to look at, high quality farmland.
I'll make one more too. None of this land is shovel ready, as far as I know. By the time you go through the permit process and everything, this could probably take years. And so, having 800 acres makes sense because I would assume it would take 5-6 years before anything gets, even contractor comes in, before they even get set up and ready to go. That's my understanding.
Thanks, Councilor Smith. There's one, I want to use that as well, also a way to follow up on an earlier question, and frankly, Heather's response. The urban services, like sewer and water, for example, are not provided by the city, they're provided by others.
We provide
like water
water.
commission or clean water services. And if you bring in a 3-year supply of land, they're not going to invest in significant infrastructure because they don't know whether it's going to go any further than that. They're going to need to know that before they take on the expense of increasing pipe sizes, adding pump stations and so on, that there's a reasonable likelihood that there's going to be some build out over the next 10 to 20 years. Same thing with roads. I mean, as Heather mentioned, the infrastructure planning requires more certainty than a 3 to 5 year plan. Because none of this, as you pointed out, is shovel ready and won't be shovel ready until those infrastructure pieces are in places and we've done a comprehensive planning. So yes, it's likely to take a number of years before anything happens.
Can you confirm what regional partners that we have spoken with that are aware of our future aspirations and what that looks like?
Mayor, yes. So on the infrastructure utility side, Portland General Electric, primary electrical provider, the Joint Water Commission, as managed by City of Hillsborough, Walton Valley Water District. Both of those water providers are aware and have been discussing things with us. Clean Water Services, the nearly countywide wastewater sewer service provider, is aware and working with our plans. Washington County, the State of Oregon, Department of Land Conservation and Development, and Business Oregon, Business Development, Industry Development Department. Metro, we've had conversations with Metro about our planning relative to where their UGB is and how we can work together on transportation. ODOT and DLCD are the source of the $230,000 grant we have for comprehensive planning. The City of Hillsborough, the West Side Economic Alliance. Our our Senator Weber's office, representation that we have at the state, otherwise, just about any partner we could reach out to and work with on this. Greater Portland Inc. We've had conversations with and are working with on this. So we're far from alone. Everybody who, as Chris mentioned, anybody who would be looking at investing significantly in North Plains in terms of its infrastructure and utilities in particular is looking at us for going with a 20-year plan and a 20-year process here, because they have to have assurances that the long-term build out is being appropriately planned, but they want to be and they've committed to be part of it. And that's some of the letters we actually put into the record.
Any other questions for staff during the public hearing? Okay, with that, I will go ahead and close the public hearing at 10:21 p.m. And this time will be for comments from City Council before we make a decision. And I will start. I heard a few things this evening that made me pause. I've read testimony. I've read all the testimony. And I think it's important to understand our past. I think it's important to understand where we came from in order to understand how we're going to move forward. And I moved here 17 years ago. My husband's been here over 25. He's retired law enforcement. And he took up becoming a realtor as a hobby. The only property I own in North Plains is where my house sits on, the 7,500 square feet, where my 1,700 square foot home sits on. So I wanted that to be disclosed because I don't want you to feel like, because there was a comment tonight about people on this committee and people on other committees being, you know, realtors and landowners and all that kind of stuff. So all you in this room own a hell of a lot more land than I do. Many of you, not all of you, but many of you. But I think it's important to understand again where we came from and where we're going. And when I moved here, I became immediately involved in the community with the Walking Trail Committee, the Vision Committee. My neighbors talked me into getting on City Council. And I want to applaud a lot of our community leaders over the years and the volunteers over the years and the business owners and the staff over the years and the neighbors and the time and effort that they have put in to create this vision statement. This vision statement was created it was created in 2015, but it was started before 2015. And the residents that came together to put this together are still in this community. Many of them are still in this community, and so are the business owners in this community. And they gave up their evenings and weekends to create this so that we could have a vision for our future. So we could plan and preserve that small town charm. When I moved here 17 years ago, the population was roughly 1,900. Today it's about 35. So in 17 years, we've just about doubled our population. It was a small town, had small town charm back then. When my husband lived here 25 plus years ago, he'd come home from work in the graveyard, get on his ATV and drive up and down North Avenue when it was a dirt road. So it was charming back then. It was charming 17 years ago, and it's still charming today. And I really feel like a lot of that comes from the volunteers who are on committees, who are on this council, and who have been on councils over the years. I'm on 2 boards and about 3 committees. You want to look at my calendar? I mean, I don't know why my husband's still married to me, but he's, you know, I don't know. I give more of my time and my personal time for this community than any person up here on this dais. I'm not looking for accolades. I'm not looking for, kudos or a pat on the back or anything like that. I'm telling you this because there are people in this community that have vision for this community, not just for next week, but 10 years from now, and 20 years from now, and 40 years from now. And do we need to incorporate and have all of you in the room and have this conversation about what that's going to look like? Yeah, we do. Okay. Could we do better? Yes, everyone could do better, and we can do better too. But I really believe that this group, this body, and other bodies who have spent blood, sweat, and tears on things like this, the comprehensive plan, the EOA, the HNA, the Parks Master Plan. I mean, I can go on and on and on. I'm proud of the work that those folks have done, and I will stand next to them because they're my teammates. And I want them to understand and also to ensure that we take the time and have that opportunity to make sure that we continue to preserve North Plains and have that small town charm. Like I said, it was that way 17 years ago, it's that way today. And if the values of the leaders of this community value that small town charm, it will become an environment, it will become a culture, and it will become something that will do everything that we can in our personal being to sustain that. And I feel really passionate about that. And I'll be happy to sit down with any of you anytime over coffee and to talk to you and to figure out how other ways that I can bring you to the table to have these conversations. But why aren't these people, I know Councilor Sheldon, is very passionate about his constituents, as I am, as everybody else is up here in this dais. And a lot of our constituents know what we're doing. They call me, they call us, they come to our houses. We see them at chili cook-off. We see them at ice cream socials. We see them at 4th of July. We have an event just about every month where we tap into our community and we touch them and we talk to them and we hear them. So I'll shut up and let somebody else have the mic, but I feel really strong and passionate about that we are doing the right thing. I mean, I live by 3 principles in my house, and that's do your best, do the right thing, and treat others the way you want to be treated. And if I'm not being held to those standards, I mean, call me out, but I feel like I'm doing the right thing with what I have for my community. Let someone else do it.
A lot of talks about the rural community and how we have space, and you're the neighbors and just be small, right? When I came here in North Plains, that's how I put the place. Very small. I felt good about having my daughter, and now it's go outside and play. Just have fun. I know your neighbors, I know everybody around. It's nice. Traffic's nice. There's a law passed which allowed property community just to become, annexed into the city just by paying a fee. So then I realized the city's going to grow big and fast as it comes that way. So that's when I was on planning commission then, and then I became city council. And I realized that growing up, the population of the earth was 3 billion people. Oh, wow, it's a lot of people. Oh yeah, but a little while ago it's 1 billion. Wow, look at that. Somebody said a stat that is more people alive today than have ever lived on planet Earth. And those people have babies. What is going to happen? The way we have to do it is by measured response and try to figure out how we're going to do it. None of us have a crystal ball. If we did, I'd be rich and I wouldn't be here. Probably, but watching on TV or something. None of us know what's going to happen. We have some ideas, we have some rational thoughts, and we try to put together rules of how things can grow. And it's gonna happen. We have to figure out how we're gonna supply people's needs in a measured way, or makes more sense. I think we can do it. And there is large farms around here, great land. Unfortunately, we can't expand into the air. They make a skyscraper and just have one nice little skyscraper, but that's not what we're doing right now. We have to expand into the area we have a lot of this. And in time, when if that becomes a mistake and we say, oh no, what are we gonna do? Then the laws will change and we'll try to adjust our sales at that point. But right now, we are expanding. In the races as well. These ways to live. And I work for this large evil company in Intel. I've been working there for a very long time because when I was younger, I was a law enforcement, and I realized I don't want to be around bad guys all day. I want to be around the smartest people in the world. And these guys are going to build stuff to make the human race smart. We're going to do more things with less because we get to share our knowledge. You have computers that can do more processing than human minds can ever do. So that's why I would work over there. And this is the big villain in the room right now, Intel. However, it wasn't Intel, it'd be something else. People are going to be alive and going to be working on something. So, a lot of my employees that I'm a manager now, have to struggle to find out where they're going to live. And it's tough. There's not a lot of housing. They're living in apartments, sometimes with like roommates. And it's tough. Nobody wants to do that. When I was younger, I had to do that. And I didn't want to, but I had to. You need more housing. You need places for people to live. You need industry. The city cannot be a business community. What's wrong with that? The problem what's wrong with that is there's not enough income to pay for the services. So you need to have businesses here as well. So we got to strike a balance. And that's where doing it the right way and block that out comes in. That's it on that.
Anyone else? Councilor Sheldon?
Yeah, I've got a few comments. I think about a number of things that I heard tonight. Some of them I object to, some of them I have some sympathy for, but I wrote down a few words of what I reflected on when I made my notes from some of the comments, both in favor and in opposition to this. And I think about the words misinformation. There's a fair amount of misinformation out there. Speculation, definitely at the forefront. There's a whole lot of speculation about things that aren't going on. So somebody needs to check their facts. Desired outcomes. Yeah, I think we have been very intentional. We've been very deliberate. We have been very calculated because we followed a process that's set up before us, that it's prescribed. I think this is congruent with the real spirit of Senate Bill 100, going way back to 1973. But we still going to be deciding something locally. It's not entirely out of our hands. I mean, this is our community. You may be our neighbors, but you may not be my constituent. I don't know that I represent you. I represent the people. My duty is to the people of North Plains, not Washington County, not the state of Oregon, not the state of Illinois or anywhere else. It's right here in this community. And I think this expansion serves their best public interest. I think we have done a very thoughtful and balanced job of making this a reliable 20-year plan. This is not what's going to happen in 3 years. There's a lot of passion about that. But, we don't have any idea what the economy is going to hold. We don't know what land values are going to do, whether they go up or down. Interest rates are pretty much a sore subject when it comes to development. Borrowing money is a major barrier to making improvements. But I am resolute in my belief about this expansion. And I'm not a politician, I'm a decision maker. And that's what I'm doing tonight, and I support this.
It's hard to follow some of these speeches here, but I want to be succinct for the sake of time for tonight. But I want to say thank you to each and every one of you in this room, from constituents to neighbors, to staff. Just thank you, because I know countless hours and energy and passion that is in this room, and you're either on one side or the other, and it's the role of this board tonight to draw a line in the sand and take a stance. And it is not an easy decision. I empathize with the thought of someone's livelihood. And I also empathize with the thought of determining the destiny for future generations to come. And that being said, I think we've all expressed our opinion. I don't want to add a lot of emotion to this. But I do want to make a data-driven decision. And this is something that, as a body, we have spent hours and hours and hours upon. And I think about the beauty of democracy, that if the board, the council decides to expand the UGB tonight, that there is still power within that democracy. That the landowners can still make the decision if they would like to sell, or if they want to continue on the farming legacy for many generations to come. That is the beauty of the country we live in. But I really want to say thank you again to everyone here for coming tonight, for all the meetings, all the testimony, and I will pass it on over to the next counselor. So thank you.
Dr. Smith.
I'm not sure what I can add, but I'd like to, I did write some comments down, but I'd like to commend the city staff and the mayor for doing a fantastic job putting this together from 490 explaining everything. Along with the mayor, not the mayor, but the city lawyer. I think it's been really quite and some kudos too for what she's done. But a couple of things I guess I don't understand is we're calling the farmers who want to sell our land greedy farmers. And at the same time, the farmers want to expand. Well, they can only buy from these greedy farmers if they want to expand to them. Second, another comment was made, our property taxes are low, raise them. But then another comment, affordable housing, that you can't do both. Another thing was, we are greedy and corrupt to backroom deals. I don't see anybody here being a mafia or doing corrupt deals. None of us are big landowners or developers. All we put our time in. I'm retired. This is what I get to do during my retirement. My wife on the North Plains Event Association, and I hate to tell you how many hours she spends on the computer putting things together as a volunteer coordinator, trying to get volunteers to do different things. The hours that are put into this, and as the mayor said, this is a full-time job, and she makes nothing. So, you got to commend her on that, and different committees she's on, and working with the state government, county government. It's not an appreciated job that she should get appreciated for. There's a lot of counselors here that have families and put time in, and being retired, I've got to look at my schedule before I go play sometimes. Pretty much said it all.
I want to echo Councilor Payton's sentiment that she said. I just want to thank everyone that came tonight, proponent or opponent. I've been on this council for many years, and just seeing everyone here You know, whether they're in favor or not of this expansion has really just shown me that we have a common love for North Plains, and that's just really, it's really great to see and invigorating to me. All the time that we have spent on this, it's actually been many, many years, unlike others have kind of mentioned. So a lot of blood, sweat, and tears have gone into this with staff, council, other boards, and commissioners. So I just want to echo the sentiment of thank you for everyone's hard work. Thank you for showing up today, your testimony, and we'll see what the future holds.
Why always have to be last? Yeah, I also want to thank everybody that came out tonight. And a couple comments were made by people out there that I know that are working in the farming community for the last 50 years. And I know the struggles that you're up against, and it's a commendable occupation to be a farmer. Let me tell you, you provide the food that we eat, and God forbid if you farmers go away. Anyway, I'm lived here 50 years, and it's been a nice little community. And I know growth is inevitable. It's happening all throughout the county. It isn't being stopped by small groups like you. I don't see anybody else stopping that, but it's nice to see you here with your opposition. Like you said, there's no residents here, but everybody from within the county is here, so that's great to see a lot of friendly faces. I'm for it. They came here when the town was small in 1973. And I'd like to say I leave it that way when I leave this earth, that it will still be small. And I think it will be. I don't have that many years left. But anyway, my granddaughter says, if you vote for this tonight, I'm going to have to change my last name. So what position to be in? I know it'll get done. If I might be a dissenting vote, it's still going to go forward. I don't think I'm probably the only one that I don't like some of the houses being built to the north here. I don't like them at all. It wasn't my perception of what North Plains should look like. When I lived in Old Town, I was hoping it would be somewhat similar to that, but it's not. It's complete opposite. And they're small, they're expensive, and my granddaughter and son-in-law, they can't afford one. Period. That's why they're living with me. I mean, it's terrible. I mean, you know, you gotta make a big salary like Greg said. It's huge. And it can't go on like that. In my opinion, that's the political thought that I have, that these houses can't double and be over $1 million in the next 5 or 10 years. It can't be. But anyway, I know I had the only comment that I like potato chips, and you can eat those, but you can't eat potato chips. Anyway, that was my lingo years ago at Joe Cameron Seed Company when I had to give speeches for those guys. So. And Intel scared me, but that's it is. If we're here, we can't move. Where are you going to go? Everybody here's not. There's no house for sale because you can't afford not to move. It's scary. I'm not trying to paint a negative picture, Mayor, but you know, like everybody here that's on this board, I wouldn't be here if I didn't. I've been here for many years to just walk away. I'm not going to do that. I can work with anybody, but I do have that thing in my heart that says, what's the right thing to do? And when I see these faces, when people are all living within the county and there's not a resident here in North Plains tonight, I want to do the right thing. So I am probably going to be a dissenting vote, but I will work with this community, this council. I will not quit. I will stay here, and I hope that we can build smaller houses for people. They don't need to build these big mansions anymore. We need to build smaller houses where people can afford them. In my opinion, I hope I can get some say so on that down the road when we do this planning. Will we not? Or do we going to have to do the state going to dictate all this?
Councilor Kendall, we have many hours of planning ahead of us.
Okay.
So don't worry about that.
Okay, I hope to live to see that, okay? All right.
You'll be around.
I think I've set it up, and I thank every one of you that's here tonight, and you put a lot of thought and effort into that. And I commend every one of you for being here tonight. Thank you so much.
What is the motion of the council?
I'm going to recommend that based on the evidence and testimony in the record, that I move we do a first reading of ordinance 490, amending the city comprehensive plan by title only.
No,
All right, we have a motion on the table by Councilor Sheldon, seconded by Councilor Page. Any discussion? I want to thank staff for the many hours of consultation, work, and everything that you put into all of this. It's very, very much appreciated. I know it's a late night, everyone wants to go, but I know we have a lot more work ahead of us, but thank you very much. Also, thank you to everybody in the room. No matter what side you're on, I think we need to find a way to bridge the gap and work together. And I think that we can and will do that. So again, thank you everybody for your testimony and for being here with us and spending your evening with us.
I'll call a question.
We have a first and a second. Hearing no more discussion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay.
Hey.
All right. Lori, do you need to? We should probably do it. Councilor Sheldon.
Aye.
Councilor Martinez. Councilor Schmidt.
Aye.
Councilor Bateman. Aye. Councilor Page.
Aye.
Councilor Kendall. Nay.
Nay. I want to get it right. Thank you.
And Mayor Lanahan. Aye. Thank you. Yeah, you bet. No problem. All right. So first reading by title only. Ordinance number 490 is an ordinance of the City Council of the City of North Plains, Oregon, amending the urban boundary and approving the associated comprehensive plan text amendments. Now, may I have a motion to approve the first reading of ordinance number 490?
I move we approve the first reading of ordinance 490.
And first by Councilor Sheldon, seconded by Councilor Smith. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay.
Nay.
All right, the ayes have it, motion carried. So, Councilor Sheldon, your decision.
Aye.
Councilor Martinez, Councilor Smith.
Aye.
Councilor Payton. Aye. Councilor Fade. Councilor Kendall.
Nay.
Mayor Lanahan, aye. All right, thank you very much. I'm going to release that on a few more minutes. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night and safe trip home. All right. Council,
This is, no, I have nothing really to report, so.
what you put that
Okay.
Oh. We're actually gonna speak on it.
Sorry, we almost gave you a heart attack.
Would you say that 4 minutes to be waiting?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I just got out of
I could just say, hey, folks, bang that gavel. Hey, folks, we're gonna try to finish up our meeting tonight, so if you need to conversate, do it outside, and we'll probably join you in a couple minutes. Thank you.
Sounds like we're gonna break this.
There we go. Yeah.
All right, thanks. We're going to go ahead and go to the city manager's report. If you have any questions for Andy, please see him tomorrow.
I do just want to say, thanks to these staff for presenting, but thank you to Lori for all the coordination effort and Steve here. So as you saw, a lot of testimony, a lot of stuff rolling in, and Lori kept her cool and helped keep this meeting moving along. Cool for her, but I just want to give Lori some kudos.
You know what that gray hair is?
Oh, strike that from the record.
That's 10:50.
Got up, okay. I got up.